Hello, you're watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show, and I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
Yeah, so as I was saying before I realised that these guys were muted, Dave is actually running a little bit late today, and we are going to be having a conversation about morality and psychopathy from a psychological perspective and comparing it to how similar it is with philosophy. But this is the sort of pre-show warm-up to that, where we're just going to have a conversation about strange experiences. Now, I'm sure we've all had them. We've all had things that, at least at the time, we couldn't explain. Maybe we put it down to magic or gods or anything like that. And maybe later then realize, hang on, I was really stoned at the time, or I had a skinful of alcohol, or something like that. But still, some of these experiences still, even though we can logically explain them away, just tickle at the back of our minds. So have you guys ever had any experiences like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a few. I think I used to do like a weird ghost hunting thing with a
Oh yeah.
few friends, and this was prior to me being like there's no ghosts and stuff. I was a bit more kind of like open to it. And we went to a few different places, and there's this like old castle called Recolfa, which is on the coast, and it's like an old Roman fort, and there's apparently loads of buried babies and stuff there, like some proper nasty stuff happened. Yeah. And we went there and we could hear like weird noises, and we had like feelings like people were touching us and throwing stuff at us, and loads of weird stuff happened. And now it's like, well, that was obviously just like the wind. So yeah.
Well, your mind playing tricks on you. I suppose in some respects it could be like we were talking about a couple of weeks ago about how your mind tends to fill in things if it expects something. For example, like you were talking about eating a bit of meat that tasted a little bit funny, and all of a sudden you feel
Mhm.
sick because your mind has told you to feel sick rather than it actually being off. You're going into that place. You've got these expectations of weirdness. Um, my stepdad had one that. I swear that is just a dream, but he believes he saw the ghost of a werewolf. Yeah, so combining supernatural things, yeah.
That's really cool.
That is really cool, actually.
Come through when he was a little boy, and come through his room and stand at the end of his bed and sort of like growl at him and walk off.
Does he get sleep paralysis?
Well, I don't know, not that I know of.
Because that's a real common sleep paralysis thing, is having something stand at the end of your bed, and like it
Yeah.
could be like a ghost or something, like, or but it's like
Sleep
apparently terrifying.
paralysis is horrible.
I've
I've
never
had it
had it.
twice. I've had it twice. And Jesus Christ, fucking, I hope never again. I've never seen anything, but I've been there and been able to hear and kind of feel stuff moving in the background. No, not fun.
Uh, question from Rusty: how do I drink whiskey without a sour face? Because it's bourbon, and bourbon's a little bit sweeter
Oh,
than Scotch, so I don't need to go. "Mm." And I must admit, because I knew it might take a while for Dave to get here, I did put a couple of cubes of ice in as well to sort of make it last a bit longer. But
I'm
there
trying
you
to I'm trying to look fancy, but I've gone full chap and have strongbow dark fruit.
go. Nice. Now that is the
I
festival
mean,
drink.
almost snap. Just I couldn't afford Strongbow. So
um,
yeah, cheers.
I had one as well. When I was younger, except it wasn't seeing anything. Um, I always used to have dreams that came true. Always used to have dreams that sort of came true, even little bits, little conversations. I remember the weirdest one I ever had was um I was living in England at the time, and I went to a pitch shifter concert, or 1 Minute Silence. 1 Minute Silence, I think it was, at the Tunbridge Wells Forum. And I
Mm.
was with a group of people that I'd only really spoken to one of them before. There weren't any metalers in my year, so I hung out with the guys in the year above. I don't know why that. There was one in the end, Metler in my year other than me, and we went to this gig and we went back to his house, and I was in this dark room, and this guy Akil was there, and this exact conversation played out as it had done 2 years prior when I was living in America. And it was word for word. And then I even started saying, oh my God, I've had this thing. And that bit was in the dream as well. And I was going, oh God, this is so weird. And the next thing you're going to say is this. And he was like, how did you know? And it was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. This is really weird. But that was the weirdest version of that I'd ever had. And I've read loads of things where they explain it, and essentially you're filling in the blanks of things that had happened before, and it's not actually really happening, but it doesn't stop it feeling like it actually happened that way.
Also, could be explained by your friend intentionally fucking with you, and no matter what you said they were going to say next, they would have said, fuck, how did you know? Because it's exactly what I would do to you.
That's true.
This is true.
Yeah, how high were you?
Not at all, actually. No. I'd had a couple of beers in the forum, but yeah, not much. I mean, I think it might have been my first ever metal gig as well. And yeah, the Tunbridge Wells Forum is used to be a public toilet that they turned into a bar with a little stage. And the beer was all sort of like
Tunbridge Wells is quite
general.
fancy though, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, which is why it made it even more funny. Tunbridge Wells, fanciest place ever, metal gig in an old toilet.
Wow. Actually, they've just opened up a toilet, a bar in Canterbury that's made from an old public toilet as well, underground.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently that's a thing.
Yeah, yeah. Weird.
Even my first ever metal gig was far more on point because it was in a repurposed church, which is as metal as it gets,
too.
really.
Mine was in a functioning church.
Oh, nice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, who was your first metal gig?
Ooh. That's a good question. I can't actually remember who it was. I think it was local bands though. I know that I have a story actually. Do you guys know Chris Jericho, the wrestler?
Yes. Well,
personally.
Obviously, yes.
So he's in a metal band and they played down in Margate, and he was like I was in sixth form and I didn't actually go to that gig, but a lot of my friends did, and he hit on like a girl from my year who was like 17 that was like creeping on her and asking for a number and stuff.
Brilliant.
And then I was like, oh no, Chris Jericho's in my bad books now. I don't like him anymore.
That sort of reminds me of it was the third time I saw Pitch Shifter, and it was at Ministry, and the weirdest thing ever. This definitely happened. This is a weird thing that actually happened. Terry Pratchett comes walking across, and they're just like, what? It was the first time, and probably the only time in my life I will ever be starstruck, because I was such a big fan of him. I was always reading one of his books, and once I got to the end of the series, if he hadn't got a new one out, I'd go back and start again until the next one came out, and I'd just read and read and read his books. I absolutely adored the man. And yeah, I barely had any chat for him. I didn't know what to say, because I was just like, other than, what the fuck are you doing here? And he ended up signing my friend's boob, and as he left, he went, little moves. Fucking cool.
My friend would be so jealous of that. He loves Terry Pratchett. Loves him.
Reading one at the moment.
Sorry, mate?
What's the name of the police?
The Watch? Police with the Watch.
The police officer, yeah.
Oh, Captain Carrot, Commander Vimes. I can't remember the name of.
Lenny.
He has a badge. He has a badge tattooed on him from one of the police officers.
Oh, really?
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm reading one of the Watch ones at the moment. I've got Jingo on the go at the moment,
That's the one with
which
the
has
spirit, the music one.
no. It's got an inventor who creates these crazy, huge, massively destructive machines, but only ever thinks of them as being completely mundane. Like the idea that a machine that can blow up an entire mountain could be used for war is just completely fucking foreign to him, and it's amazing. He's got a submarine which has got a bore thing on the front of it to be able to hitch a ride on other boats. And one, I think it's Carrot, is saying, so you could drive this into the bottom of a boat, make a hole, and sink it. He's like, only if you're a terrible person and very rude, yes.
Brilliant. I tell you what, I might have to reread that one. Although I can't at the moment because all of my books have been packed up since about 6 months ago. It's really frustrating. I've got loads of books, and well, we thought we were going to be moving, and then we were told, yeah, it'd be a really fast move. The houses tend to go in a few weeks, and a couple of weeks after getting it in, we had an offer, and then Raven screwed it up, and then we had another offer, and then they screwed it up, and so on and so forth. And eventually we went the whole market, and now it's the solicitors holding things up. So yeah, at the end of last summer, we packed books and all of our summer clothes, which I'm going to be needing very soon because it's getting warmer. But soon I'll be.
When you have a chain, though, it's really tough, isn't it?
Well, there is no chain. There's no chain either end.
Oh, is there not?
No chain either end. It's literally solicitors being crap.
They are, though, aren't they? Let's be fair.
Yeah. Way overpaid for doing that much. Yeah, exactly. I just really hope they've already randomly misquoted me and said, "Oh, by the way, there's going to be an extra 275 quid plus VAT at the end of the thing." I'm like, they turn around and come up with right at the end and try and slap on another couple of grand, which I know some solicitors do. I'm going to be furious.
just tell them your black and white joke, and then they won't.
Do you know what? I wish
Take it as long as possible.
I wish I knew where I first picked that up. I remember the first time I told it in public, and it was my first time I went to Reading, and I think I was about 16 years old. And the response was phenomenal because it was that sort of everybody sat there as the punchline comes out, and everybody's just like, what? And then you sort of hear someone starting to giggle because they get what's going on, and then this wave in this massive circle around the fire pit of everybody just. Then obviously people lobbing their cans of cider at me as well because deserved. Well, have you had any? I like
Dave.
Sorry, go for it.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I like Dave's kind of joke after where it was like, that's what the punchline is. It's a line of people waiting to punch you. Yes, that's exactly what it is.
I do like an anti-joke, though.
Right, but there's a fucking line.
I don't know. Have you had any other weird experiences?
I get one quite regularly, and I'm sure everyone kind of gets this, but I get it like a lot. Like it's been pointed out to you by my partner, and it's where like I feel like somebody said something to me. Like I hear someone say something like my name, or like they're like, I don't know, talking to me in some way, and I'm like, yeah, what did you say? Did you say something? And I'm like, I didn't say anything, Luke. And it happens to me so often, like a ridiculous amount. Like way too much.
Oh, do you know what though? Could it be people knowing
this
winds you up and they just randomly walk around?
Yeah. Now you're going to make me paranoid as well as psychotic. I'm not just going to hear voices, but I'm going to be paranoid that people are lying to me about those voices. This is a slippery slope you've got me on now, Joe.
What about you, Kristen?
when I was a kid, I have a vague memory of thinking that I saw a ghost, like driving a car through it, but I don't think I even particularly believed it was a ghost then. It was just something weird that I couldn't explain, and that was the easiest answer at the time.
Mm. Did you go home and check your fridge?
No, unfortunately, I hadn't seen that by
then. No, it would
But
have
yeah,
been.
we discussed this on the podcast before, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
Because I messaged Brian Cox on Twitter asking for permission to use that clip on it.
We did. It's included in that podcast. Couldn't tell you which one it was, but
No,
it's
not
definitely
quite.
in one of our podcasts. So if you really want to hear a quote from Brian Cox in our podcast, you have to listen to all of season 1 and all of season 2 of Fresh Air. But skip the first 2 episodes. It wasn't in that. In fact, you could probably skip the first 3 episodes because you didn't join us until the 4th episode, did you?
Yeah, 4th or 5th, I think.
Oh, yeah. So there you go. Not trying to get numbers up or anything like that. Nope.
Where can we find these podcasts, Joe?
Well, you can find them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere really where there's a podcast sort of thing. It's either under Fresh Air or Answers in Reason. I've started making them into playlists on Spotify as well. But yeah, we still haven't finished season 3. It's been waylaid by life and also doing the video streams as well. And the audio podcasts actually take a lot more effort to do because
You edit them.
Well, yeah, there's no visual either. And as you can imagine, as I'm sure you've seen on a number of the live streams that we've done, we go really off tangent. But when there's 5 or 6 of us there, which there quite often was for the podcast, and no visual, we'd go really, really off tangent. Off piste, sorry, on a tangent, mixing metaphors. And then there's also the quality issue as well. I find with a podcast, the audio quality needs to be that much better and clearer. So I spend ages cleaning the audio as well, and we record each person's track individually because everybody has different timbre to their voice, different microphone and all of that. So they all need a different... There's a hell of a lot of work that goes into it. And if we ever did, say, like a 3-4 hour podcast, it would take me a week to actually go through and clean up the audio and edit it down and all of that. And it's definitely a lot more work that goes into it. But I think it's probably because I took far too much pride in it as well. If I'd have just gone, that'll do.
Yeah. Well, I can tell that you're someone who, when you start a project, that's it until it's done.
The polar opposite of me. I start 12 and finish none ever.
like I'm kind of in the middle ground. Like I uploaded that video and it had like 4 mistakes in it, and I was like, it'll do. So
that's a good way to be, though. At the end of the day, there are times when you're just like, you can overproduce something, can't you? There are certain things that it's not great, but I'll leave it in there.
Yeah.
But you saying about the tangents, I think there are some episodes where it was more tangent than topic.
Yeah, this is true. Some of them were really funny, though. So if they were ever really entertaining,
sure.
We left them in. But sometimes if they went just too off-piste, oh, God.
I'm pretty sure there were some where we were recording for like 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then I look at it on the list and it's like 45 minutes. Fucking what?
Yeah, I mean, on the Patreon site, we always did the unedited version. I'd still clean the audio first, but then put the unedited version up there for anybody who wanted to listen to that. So you've got all the pre-show chat and all the post-show chat, and all the tangents and all the crap that comes out of our mouths. And yeah, some of the stuff on there is probably good that we don't release it to the public, because when you're recording that long, I mean, we did end up having quite a few drinks, and there are some where you can really hear the change in our voices as we get more and
Is it a bit
more.
like the FFA?
Yeah.
Because what one thing I did with the FFA was I looked at the first like 5 minutes, and then I was like, I'm gonna see what he's like at the last 5 minutes, and then you completely like your whole posture's changed.
Yeah, well, I did, that day. I mean, I didn't even realize how long we were streaming for. 7.5 hours total was that stream. And I finished off all my booze. As you can see, it's no longer on the shelf. But that day I'd had a couple of tramadol. So the booze wasn't even fully hitting me. It was just like, yeah, I'll have another drink. Yeah, have another drink. Yeah. And it was just going down like water. Um, and honestly, like quite a lot of the time when I'm having a drink, I know I've had a drink quite quickly, but honestly, I didn't feel like I had a drink. Now that time, I ended up in bed about 4:30 in the morning. I had to get up about 2.5 hours later for work, and I was perfectly fine. I say I was perfectly fine. By the end of the day, I was like, I need to go to bed. But I woke up in an amazing state.
Yeah, still drunk. Not
Yes.
totally fine, just still drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? You had a hangover at like 4 o'clock.
But at least it was only a tiredness hangover and it wasn't any of the other
Yeah.
effects. Just like to say hello to Josiah and Leon and Philip who've entered the chat room. Nice to have you here. We're currently doing the pre-show before the show. We're hoping Dave will get here soon, but if not, we will get to the main segment of the show. We've just been discussing strange experiences, and we've gone really off piste on that as well. And we did mention how we go off piste with everything. What about you guys in the chat room? Have you ever had any really strange experiences that you can't explain? Is there anything that you've just, or maybe you can explain now, but at the time you just thought, whoa. I actually had another one. I used to be a bit of a stoner, and it was my friend's 16th birthday, I think it was, and I was 17, and I took him to the pub up in Croydon. It was a metal pub called The Ship. And we drank Snakebite and Black all night, as you did at that time. And on way back, I used to keep my stash at a friend's house because I was really paranoid about my parents finding it. So anytime I wanted to smoke, I'd nip round there, get myself a little bit, have a bit of a smoke, and then head home. So that I didn't ever have anything on me, or if I did, I had like the tiniest little bit, which was easy to hide. And so we went around there and we had a quick smoke, and we were walking back, and we were walking across the park, and I went, "There's a car coming." I went, "What?" "There's a car coming." It's about 2 a.m. at this time. You couldn't hear anything. The occasional whooshing of the M25, I think it was at the time. I was living in Oxford. But no, there's definitely a car coming. Like, shut up, Joe. You're just being paranoid. Paranoid about what, man? I can just hear it. This car. It's coming. Like, shut up, man. I was like, okay. We carried on walking, and then a couple of seconds later, there's this car coming from behind us. And I went, he's going, "Oh my God, there's a car coming." I was like, "I know." It's a police car. It's going to pull round the roundabout, park over there, and 2 police officers are going to get out. He went, "Shut up, Joe. You can't tell that. It's not even in visual range." I was like, "I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen." We get to the roundabout. Police car comes round, sits down. 2 police officers get out, and I'm starting to freak out because I thought I was just being a bit paranoid at the time. But because I was also stoned, I was like, "Shit, man, I can really see the future." And I mean, I put it down to complete coincidence and the fact that I was stoned at the time, and
I've had similar things like that though, where my friend Harry, who's on my videos, he's the deist. He's convinced that I'm psychic, and like I do magic tricks and stuff anyway. So like I you fuck with him sometimes with that. but but there have been times genuinely when he's like, I might say like, oh, I wonder whether I should have pizza tonight or something along those lines, something a really bit mundane. But he's like, I was thinking the exact same thing. What the fuck, dude? How the hell are you reading my mind like this? You do this too much. And it would just be out of the blue. We won't be talking or anything, and it will just come out of the blue. And I'll say exactly what he's thinking it was a thought of mine,
Yeah.
basically. Very odd, but yeah. I think it's just, again, I think we just have maybe similar, like,
Yeah, on a similar
wavelength.
wavelength.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get those ones.
One
as
of those
well.
things as well. It's where you kind of get that bit of confirmation bias where you forget the times when you've said something and it doesn't happen. Like the whole thing when somebody phones and it's like, oh, I was thinking about them, and then the phone rang. It's like,
Yes.
how many times did they phone when you weren't thinking about them? And you measure the hits and forget the misses, isn't it? It's like how they do the whole cold reading stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cold reading is so powerful. I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, I think Joe, I mentioned that stuff around the 16 type personality thing, where people are
yes.
like, "Oh yeah,
Myers-Briggs.
yeah, the Myers Briggs, yeah," and it's basically
so
as
me.
effective. It's astrology, essentially, right?
is.
Barnum statements.
Yeah, they are Barnum statements. Yeah,
Yeah.
they like the all of the personality things have had to be turned into spectrums because they cannot fit into these like letters like how they say. So yeah, it's the same thing. People read stuff and they apply it to parts of themselves. The same reason tarot works. Like I do tarot cards occasionally, and I don't think that they're mystical or anything, but they offer really good advice because you apply it to your life and you start thinking about things in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I
That's
know
an
a couple of
interesting one.
people. I mean, my mate Ben, he's a psychotherapist. He doesn't believe in any of that shit, but he still reads his star sign for the day because sometimes it's like it puts him sometimes in a different state of mind or a different frame of mind, gets him thinking about something that he'd forgotten about, and yeah, just for entertainment purposes, but it holds a benefit. Not that any of it is necessarily true, but it's just getting you on a different wavelength.
It's kind of like how, so when you read it, you subconsciously apply it in a certain way, and then that brings to the forefront to consciously think what your subconscious is applying to it. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So if like a tarot card says you're worried about a relationship in your life, your brain's going to go, what relationship? And I'm actually worried about that relationship. And you're going to start thinking about it. And then the next one's like, you find a way of mending it. You'll be like, oh, okay, yeah. So I'm going to find a way of mending it. So how do I do that? And then you start to think about ways you're going to mend it. And then you mend it.
You've just placebo affected fucking astrology.
That's exactly what it is.
Brilliant.
So these things aren't useless. They're just not magical.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah. I think Philip wants you to do a magic trick.
No. No, I'll do it next time I'm on. Okay. Not tonight.
You've got a little hat and everything.
Do one.
Yeah, I've got a top hat actually.
Wicked.
I can do a bit of stage magic quickly.
Go on then.
Yeah, I can make myself disappear.
You also managed to make yourself.
Daniels.
You managed to make Luke switch places with you at the same time as well. Teleportation at the same time.
Yeah. Wow. I told you, stage magic.
See, I've read Philip's mind. I think we found out recently that actually everybody is just some form of replication of my own consciousness. You're all different aspects of it. So I didn't really read your mind, Philip. I read my own.
It's hard solipsism, isn't it? No one else actually exists.
Yeah.
Just you.
You please imagine me with some more money and less diseases.
Wouldn't that be cool? Ultimate power. Although, I mean, if hard solipsism is true and I'm the only one that exists, and I came up with people like Trump and Bojo, I'm a really sick and twisted individual.
I think for me, that's the key to hard solipsism is these idiots.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Why would
come
I
up with
ever
this.
come up with these people?
Yeah.
Who've got 2 brain cells and they're both fighting for 3rd place.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is my new favourite insult for calling someone stupid.
Just quickly check on Dave and see if he's gonna make it. If not, we can start. I don't have a message from Dave. In fact, I've only got a message from my mum saying, meant to say, please don't put the silver cutlery in the dishwasher. Because I'm moving, my mum's offloading a load of stuff, and you got your knife and fork when you were a baby, sort of thing. I think that's all it
Are you
was.
sure it's not that you secretly live with your mum and you accidentally put the silver cutlery in the dishwasher?
No, she
Silver
knows I just put
cutlery,
everything.
is this how we ended up with the ghost of a werewolf?
Yeah. But yeah, okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Should we start? And if Dave joins us, I can quickly switch us around to 4 cameras anyway. So for the main event, we're going to be discussing morality and psychopathy. We're going to be discussing it from a psychological perspective, but comparing it, as in morality, to the philosophy. I don't know if there's any philosophy of psychopaths. You'd need Dave here for that one. But thankfully, I know just enough about morality to be able to hold a conversation on it. So I think what we should actually discuss first of all is the terminology and if it is any different or not used at all within psychology. So, what is morality?
So I guess from a psychological perspective, we use morality as so we're looking at morality rather than defining what morality is. I think that might be a key difference.
So,
Is that we
yeah, just the general definition of morality.
right from wrong.
So,
How do
yeah.
we know what's right from wrong?
Okay, cool. So, I mean, that's a similar thing. Principles of good, bad, right, wrong behavior.
Yeah.
And a moral, how would you define that?
So a moral is a behavior that's or a kind of a concept that's good for you and for others.
Cool. I'd probably say a moral is a judgment on a behavior that might be done, but as you said, it can also apply to a concept. I mean, technically, you could even have morals in a story form, like Aesop's fables and things like that. And
Yeah.
the moral of the story is, yeah. So I mean, that's essentially the same. Do you use terms like subjective and objective when you're discussing morality?
Right. Yeah. So subjective and objective have very specific meanings in psychology. So subjective would be from the opinion of the individual, and
Yep.
objective would be outside of the opinion of the individual.
Yeah, okay, so that's basically tracks with how it would be used in philosophy as well. So it'd be applied slightly differently. It would be talking about where the truth maker comes from. So if morality was subjective, then the opinion of the person is what makes the thing right or wrong. So if I was to say it's good to throw cans at children, that's my opinion. Therefore, that's the truth maker. Whereas if I
Got to
was
make it perfectly clear to everybody that that is actually Joe's opinion too. We don't want that to get lost in the ether.
No,
Underlined.
he told me.
Yeah.
Actually, he did tell me that.
I'm pretty sure that's what his tattoo said in Latin.
And so objective again, it's sort of above personal opinion. So if I was to tell you, or you were to tell me, no, Joe, it's wrong to do that, you would be going above my personal opinion. Now, there's different ways it could be done in above personal opinion. So, treating morality objectively would be telling someone else they're wrong. But then there's also ethical standards that would be regarded as objective as well, whether it was, say, divine command theory or utilitarianism. They're ethical standards that are above your personal opinion. And an easy one for people to understand is law is above your personal opinion. Laws and morality are different, but it's an easy way to describe it for people. Just going, well, I don't agree with that law doesn't mean it's not illegal. And that's the same sort of thing with morality. Just going, well, I disagree with that doesn't necessarily make it moral. Is that sort of in line?
Yeah, I guess so. So, but just to clarify something, because this is something that I've actually kind of seen and questioned. When we're talking about objective morality, does the genetic makeup of the individual count as objective?
In
Intrinsic moral.
So I would say that it is an objective thing that changes their subjective stance.
Right. Okay.
Because it's still informing their opinion.
Because I guess that's the thing. That's the discussion that's had with theists a lot of the time. Is morality objective, right? And I would say yes, because there's inbuilt moral systems within most human beings, and similar moral systems within human beings through evolution, due to those in-group out-group biases that we were talking about last time we spoke. So I would say yes, it is objective, but then that's different to the objective used by theists when they're talking about a higher power influencing our moral decisions, if that makes sense.
Even then, though, the higher power, it's still above our personal opinion. So God is the arbiter, and all the rules he's done, it's a deontological rule set. So again, it's like law, except God has given us that law. So that would still be an objective standard because our opinion doesn't change that. So that's why it is an objective standard.
Does that mean the biological predisposition is objective as well?
I think that's yeah, I think that's more of a complicated one. I mean, whilst biology might influence things,
it's not necessarily the deciding factor.
No.
There are other things which come into play as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how we were discussing before with whether free will or hard determinism exists, where we would say that learning morality is kind of like an add-on. So maybe those inbuilt things are kind of like one part of an additional system building up and up, which then influences your opinion.
Yeah.
So it would still ultimately mean they were subjective, I think, if that makes sense.
Well, if I was genetically predisposed to a certain behavior, say I was genetically predisposed to violent outbursts, that's a behavior that I could still reason is wrong and know because of whatever standard I'm applying to. So I don't think a genetic disposition necessarily would inform your morality as such, but
as an individual potentially, but as a group behavior, perhaps that genetic predispositions within a group kind of inform an emergent I'm going to use that word, an emergent objective morality.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, if we're looking at from a cultural level for the different groups, within philosophy, we'd call that relative morality. So if subjective morality is the truth maker is the person, relative morality is the culture is where the truth value is. Right. So if relative morality was true, though, we wouldn't look at another culture and say they're wrong to do it. Because, for example, there are cultures out there that think it's perfectly acceptable to kill homosexuals and atheists, for example. Now, if relative morality was the case, then it would be moral for them to do that. Even if we disagreed, it would be moral within their culture. So we'd have to say, well, whilst you're there, that is moral, but if they came over here, it wouldn't be, sort of thing, because this is our culture here, that's there. But we don't do that. We judge them and we tell them what they're doing is immoral. So again, we're holding that culture to a standard above the culture's opinion. So we're treating that objectively as well, which is why morality is far more complex than a simple subjective versus objective. I think it's a combination of all these things intertwined. Do terms like descriptive and normative get used when you're discussing it from a psychological point?
No, I don't think those terms really.
Okay.
So I guess in terms of morality, the discussion is normally about how we develop morality and what that process is, rather than what morality is or what the kind of like the moral behaviors are. So I guess we take the standard morality system that's imposed in the culture, so a Western one, and then we say, is this moral? Is this behavior moral? And if not, how do we reach that point?
Fair. Okay.
I just wanted to go back a second to what you were saying about predisposition and stuff like that. So like an evolved morality. So we would consider it moral to look after our children, even if it was potentially at the expense of somebody else, because that's what we as biological machines have evolved to do.
Yeah.
But I think when we start to look at morality, we need to take it a step further than that, because otherwise we end up on a kind of genetic fallacy, naturalistic fallacy, where just because it's natural means it's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we could be looking at things like, well, back in the early days of humanity, when we were small little tribes, it would be an evolved trait to be tribalistic. We wouldn't now consider it to be moral to be tribalistic, because as a society, we've evolved beyond that. But mentally, from a purely neurological, psychological perspective, we may not have. So we need to go to a higher standard.
And I guess that's my view of what moral behavior is. I think we have a moral foundation. We have predisposed to have a moral foundation within our genetics and our evolution, and that moral foundation is about learning, social norms, in-group, out-group biases, confirmation bias, all of that stuff. I think all of that affects our moral foundation, and then we learn social rules and moral rules on top of that help us to kind of like have a bit of a higher kind of like moral system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think philosophy is the key for that. I don't think psychology or like evolution or anything can explain that per se. I think that's a kind of the development based on human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important as well. I think it's really important, and I think that's the difference. Is maybe that philosophy is about the what should we do, and psychology is about what do we do and how do we do it.
You've just basically covered off what I mean by normative and descriptive, but I'll let Chris say, right, and then I'll come back to that.
I was going to say that that's kind of why evolutionary psychology is really important, isn't it? We don't just look at evolution from a biological standpoint. We've got to look at the norms and changes in that regard as well, because from a purely biological aspect, we cannot evolve as fast as society does.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's the really importance of social learning theory, Bandura's social learning theory, because that system that we have inbuilt in us to act in that way is witnessing passively models in our environment and copying their behavior. And that behavior could be aggression, it could be, the kind of gender roles, anything like that. All of those things are learned through the social learning theory process. And that's why it's really important to be a good role model for children, like because they do passively. They don't even have to. You don't have to teach them actively. They just learn through observation of people that they relate to.
Yeah, sure.
Why mine are going to end up being complete wankers.
Mine too. When I have them, mine too.
Mine already are.
Yeah, so coming back to the normative versus descriptive point, descriptively, you're essentially describing how morality works in practice. This culture believes this, etc. So what it is I suppose another way, other than describing it as how it is it's what people believe is right and wrong, regardless of what actually is right and wrong. So we could descriptively say it used to be moral to own slaves, for example. If it was considered moral at the time, there you go. And then you get normative, which is talking about how we ought to act. So it's what people should be doing, regardless of what they believe they should be doing. So normatively, we'd look back at slavery and go, no, that was always wrong. We'd look back and go, I understand how it came about, and there you can see how this sort of tribalistic thing came about, reducing someone's personhood based on their race, etc. But that was wrong to do so. It was never a moral behavior, even though they considered it moral at the time. And
Yeah.
and that's why descriptively, morality is quite easily a mixture of subjective and objective and relative morals and values. But descriptively, but normatively, it is mostly objective. I don't think we can ever get it fully objective there, because I think we don't know enough. I think only if we had all the knowledge in the universe and our knowledge kept on keeping up with the way everything changes would we actually get that. Now, also, objective, at least within philosophy, doesn't necessarily mean it's correct either. If you think about it like a hypothesis within science, that your objective moral is something that, based on this, and this, and this is how we ought to act. You've got all your evidence supporting your particular thing. But over time, it sort of loops through, and maybe some more evidence comes up, and you go, "Oh, we were wrong for thinking that." Maybe one to go is they used to think spanking children was a good way to get obedience in line, but we've actually realized since then that it's got a hell of a lot of knock-on negative effects. So at the time, it might have been, thought right to do, but we change it. So your objective standard of the way people ought to act is going to change. And what you want to do is get to a point where you've got a correct objective standard, which would be the equivalent of maybe your scientific theory in this sense. Is that anywhere akin to how it might work in psychology?
Yeah, so I guess I feel like we use those words in slightly different ways. I think because psychology is focused on the person, so subjective would be how I feel, how I like, basically, if I self-report, that's subjective. Whereas if somebody observes me and I act in a certain way, so maybe I pick something up or something, or I'm fidgeting, and I don't self-report that I was fidgeting, but it's observed that I was, that's subjective. So I think it's more about the individual's behavior. So it's kind of like what you're saying, but it's brought down to an individual level. And it's kind of like about observations rather than like the descriptions of stuff. But it's I mean I think you make great points about the philosophy of it, and like how objective doesn't have to necessarily be right, and that's exactly the same in psychology, because you could observe a behavior and you could say, okay, objectively they were fiddling with a pen or something like that. That's taken down, but then your subjective opinion will always influence how you interpret that information. So you'll say that they look nervous, or they were doing this, and you need their subjective information to ask them what exactly they were feeling in the first place. It's very difficult to get purely objective data, even in like fMRI scans, like we were talking about. how people interpret those fMRI scans is subjective because they're taking objective data and they're saying, okay, this is the result of it. So it's kind of like you can try. It's you can try and be as objective as possible, but there's a layer of which that concept has to go through a human subjective channel in order for it to make sense.
And I mean, you could try and get around that, I suppose, by having all of this data measured purely by computers.
Yeah.
But even then, it would be programmed by someone. So their subjective biases would be put into the programming.
Yeah.
And it would be done on averages because a computer cannot generate your brain. It would generate the average brain based on all the previous brains before it. And
that's what people don't get about fMRI scans. They think this is a scan of your brain activity. If I took a scan of your brain activity, Joe, I mean, yours will probably be more lit up than most people, but it would be bright colors pretty much everywhere on the screen, right? And you wouldn't be able to discern what was being used at what time. You have to layer it onto everyone else's scans in order to see, okay, it's actually this area is a bit more intense, so that's the bit of the brain that they were using during this task. And the amount of, I don't know, have you guys had MRI scans?
I've had MRIs.
Oh my god, it's so noisy.
Oh, I've had an MRI, but like on my back and on my knee and stuff like that.
So imagine
it sounds like they're trying to fax you somewhere.
Yeah, and they have the screen in front of you, and they ask you to do a task whilst you have to stay perfectly still, other than moving your hands, maybe. And there's this big magnet rotating around your head, and it's not conducive to a like a real life example. It's so out of the ordinary that you can say, oh yeah, this bit's the bit for memory and this bit's the bit for this, but it's like they're in a machine that's not normal. Like, how do you know that? How do you know that's the thing? So
seeing a thing. I remember seeing a thing fairly recently. I say fairly recently. What with lockdown, it could have been 2 years ago. It could have been a month ago. I don't fucking know anymore. But where university, I think it was in Canada, I'm not sure, was showing that actually fMRI is kind of useless for showing these things, because even if you get the same person back to do the same task, a different bit of their brain might light up.
That sort of makes sense though, because once you've done a task, there's a bit of memory recall going in there. If it was the exact same start, so yeah, they would actually use a different part of their brain in that situation. Which means that if you get them in doing a task, someone doing a task that they might have done a similar one before, again, it would have a different connection to it being a completely fresh task. I hadn't even considered that, but it makes a lot of sense.
fMRIs are so overblown when it comes. It's a bit like fingerprint evidence. Fingerprints are so overblown in how good they are at actually pinning us. Like I used to know people on the forensic science course, and they were like, yeah, you get about 50 matches, and you have to look at each individual one and pick out which one's the correct one.
Blimey. Is that a technology issue? Is that a technology issue though, or is it actually just fingerprints are a hell of a lot more similar than we're told they are?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's the technology can only discern a certain level of detail, and otherwise it would just take forever, way longer than it needs to take, and then you have to kind of pick out exactly what that pattern is, because you're better at that pattern recognition, supposedly. Although I wouldn't trust it personally.
I just found the thing that I found before about it, saying that they re-examined 56 different published papers using fMRI data to gauge the reliability across 90 different experiments, and redoing it all showed that the accuracy and the correlation was not even fair, it was poor.
Oh, blimey.
That doesn't surprise me.
I've just put a link. It's from duke.edu. I put a link into the chat.
What I think is better for analyzing brain function in different areas is something called TMS, which is, what's it called? topographical magnetic stimulation, something like that. And it basically they stimulate part of your brain with a magnet, and it stops the part of that part
Oh,
from working.
yeah.
So you
When we
start to have
get onto
really weird effects.
psychopathy, there's an interesting thing about that.
Oh, okay. Well, I look forward to hearing about that. But so like they can like do it on your like occipital lobe, and you'll all your color vision will go.
Oh,
Or
really?
they'll do it in this part of your brain where your speech is, and you won't be able to say words.
Amazing. What
So
sort of
so
magnet
they
is this? I need to get myself a couple.
I've done it one time, and they did it in like over here or something, and just half my sight just went weird colors. It was
Brilliant.
very odd.
Nice.
Yeah, very odd.
I'm going to forget to bring it up later, so I'll say it now. Are you aware of Kevin Dutton?
No, I don't recognize that name.
He wrote a book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths,
Okay.
and he's done quite a lot of stuff in psychopathy. If you remember, there was a series of programs about it on Channel 4 a few years ago,
I think I remember that.
and
Yeah.
he was part of all of that process. He's got a website where, if you've seen the picture that gets shown of the top 10 and least 10 most popular professions for psychopaths, that's from his website.
All right.
So the book's amazing. I highly suggest reading it.
What's it called again? I'm just going to write it down quickly.
The Wisdom of Psychopaths.
Because I like a good psychopath book.
Yeah, and they used that to make him into a psychopath.
Did they?
Yeah, they turned
Did they do
off.
frontal lobe?
Yeah, I believe so. Because they were doing a thing. What was the ex-SAS bloke who was really popular on TV a while back?
What was that, sorry?
There was an ex-SAS bloke who was really popular on TV.
Didn't he? Oh,
I don't know. I for some reason I think you're talking about Bear Grylls.
No, not him.
Is it the guy that was on Who Dares Wins recently, and he just got fired off of it?
Possibly.
Those Who Dares Wins or something like that, where they do SAS training.
Yeah, it could have been. But yeah, they were doing a thing where they were competing with each other.
And Middleton or something like that. And something.
And yeah, he went and had this part of his brain fiddled with the magnet, which basically made him into a psychopath for half an hour or whatever. And then he went and competed again with this ex-SAS guy. Just scored so... I mean, he obviously still didn't win, but comparatively, it was insane.
So to bring it back to morality before we move on to psychopathy.
Yes.
Which I know will link back into morality again once we get there. I know it will link back into. But if we were to say that the terminology is similar between philosophy and psychology, but psychology is more looking at an individual basis, unless you're talking maybe evolutionary psychology, at which point it would be talking about the development of morality through evolution and tribal nature, in-group, out-group, etc.
Developing societies and such.
So this is a really good good point to bring in the distinction between psychology and sociology. So psychology would look at the individual in a group setting, whereas sociology would look at the group. So when we talk about like in-group, out-group biases, we might be talking about an individual who has in-group, out-group biases and their individual morality rather than the group as a whole.
Interesting. So you would be talking about how they might react to their in-group and how they might react to an out-group.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. It's not very helpful because so we try to describe individuals within a group context, which isn't very helpful because a lot of our results rely on generalizations of groups.
Right.
So it sounds like we're talking about groups. We'll say generally somebody would act in this way or somebody would act in this way, but we're usually talking about individuals.
So some of it, for you would be predicted behaviors of an individual based on averages of a group. But
Yeah.
70% of people would do this.
Yeah.
But with, say, 70% of people would do this, would you then say, and therefore it is moral? Or would you say 70% of people would do this, but actually it's immoral because of X, Y, Z?
Yeah, no, I think what's really interesting is we take maybe philosophy's description of what's moral and immoral, and then we analyze why people would make those decisions or not make those decisions. So Milgram is a really good example of this. Stanley Milgram had a study where he basically got people to come into an experiment, and they thought that someone else was in the other room, and they could hear them talking. And then they had to increase shocks every time that guy got an answer wrong, up until the point where that shock was lethal and they no longer heard the person. And then they had to continue past that point up until the highest shock, which was like 450 volts. The other person didn't exist. It was a pre-recording.
I knew I recognised that name. I have read about this before.
It's a really incredible study because 60% of people went to the end, to 450 volts.
Wow.
60%. 100% of people went to the lethal thing, which I think was like 200 volts or something. They went above lethal measures. So 100% of people went lethal, 60% went to the top. And that's been replicated many times in different cultures, and it's the same thing. And it's about this authority figure telling them to do it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's you trust in this person's in charge, and surely they can't be telling me to do something that's actually bad. And I suppose if it is bad, it's their fault because they're in charge and they told me to do it.
Yeah. So, and what it basically tried to explain was Stanley Milgram specifically was trying to explain the German effect. He was trying to see if it applied to Americans. So the German effect being, why did so many good people turn into Nazis and do Nazi things? And he showed that Americans were the same. So in there, killing someone with electric shocks is absolutely immoral behavior. I don't think anyone would dispute that. Doing it because somebody else told you, I think, would still be classed as immoral. But 100% of people would do it.
Yeah.
Something quite funny as well is that also backs up how the Stanford prison experiment was completely discredited.
Yeah.
Because the Stanford prison experiment, as I'm sure most of our watchers will know, is it was in a university, I believe. They made a mock-up of a prison. They had some people as prisoners, some people as the wardens, and the idea was that over time, the people acting as wardens would get more and more violent and see the prisoners less and less as human and treat them as such. And it turns out from interviews with quite a lot of people who were present for it, was that the wardens didn't actually want to do that. They didn't want to treat people badly. They were trying to be nice. And they were encouraged by the experimenters to go and be bastards. It's like, but that's the same thing as with the one you were just talking about. It's like, we were told to be bastards by the people in charge, so we were.
Exactly.
Completely discredits the experiment they were trying to do, but completely supports the one you were just talking about.
Ironically, there have been a couple of studies after Stanford prison experiment that actually justified the outcomes, real life. So they took real life case studies, rather than it being this fake setup.
Yeah.
And Zimbardo is a bit of a con artist. He's not a very liked psychologist in the community, but he wanted to do that in order to try and get the conversation started, and it worked. But it is the same thing, and I would argue that the uniform stuff as well. I would argue that is an actual factor. He calls it the Lucifer effect, where somebody puts on a uniform, they're put into a position of power, and it essentially corrupts them. It makes them into make more bad decisions based on them, rather than like kind of decisions based on what the group needs. And you can see that
power does tend to corrupt, doesn't it? Though, doesn't it? In general, I mean, in psychology, so we can be generalistic.
The uniform thing, I think, is quite interesting though, because at the point you put on a uniform, you start playing a role as opposed to being your own individual person. So you would start to act how you expect that role to act, to some degree at least. It will influence you.
I think a key thing about uniforms is in-group biases. Uniforms give you a really clear group of people that you can identify with, and I think this is like why sometimes you get I'm going to bring it to like kind of police officers and their kind of racist attitudes in America. The reason that you get police officers who are black who also engage in that behavior of racial profiling, etc., is because they identify more with the being a police officer than they do with being part of the black community. And so I think that's a big element of the uniform aspect, is this in group, and then you see an out group, and they become dehumanized to some level. And then you see it with soldiers in like Afghanistan. There's a few instances of them becoming like torturing people or abusing people and stuff like that, where obviously there's clear laws about that stuff, and it's because they were in a position of power.
You even notice it though. I don't know if any of you have worked somewhere where a colleague has become your boss and they've changed because all of a sudden they have to assert their authority, and you're just like, you don't need to do this. I mean, I would have respected you being my boss, and we can have a conversation about this. Now you're being a dick. I've now lost my respect for you, and then that drives a bigger wedge because they're suddenly being pushed further that way, but their behavior is pushing you further that way. You become more of a bad employee, and they become more of an arsehole boss, and it doesn't necessarily affect
somewhat
everyone
self-fulfilling
that way.
prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah, but it doesn't always go that way. It doesn't affect everyone that way. I've noticed when they become a boss, some people don't change at all, but some people just suddenly get on this power trip.
I wonder if there are different aspects as to why that happens as well. There's a whole in-group, out-group thing, but I think also there might be some aspect of imposter syndrome. Where they have just been promoted above you, they might not necessarily think that they deserve it. So they have to really exaggerate the behaviours that they think should be there for somebody in that position.
Yeah, and also I think as a species we have natural hierarchies, and I think that hierarchy. I don't necessarily agree that hierarchy should be as dominant as it is in society, but we do have a natural hierarchy anyway, and I think that takes kind of makes people more assertive than they should be in certain roles because they want to assert their like hierarchical position within that group, as well as the imposter syndrome. So kind of like you get two sides of a coin that have the same effect. You have imposter syndrome, people asserting their dominance because they feel like they shouldn't be in that position, and people who feel like they absolutely should be in that position and that they're dominant, they're better than everyone else, also asserting their dominance. So it's kind of lose-lose.
Yeah, and then you'll of course have the 1 or 2% of people who get that position and think, oh yeah, cool, and are fine.
And they're just good. Yeah. Nice.
That wouldn't be me. I'll leave it up to you to decide which of the other two I am, but it's not the middle one.
You're a wanker. Yeah. So question from Rusty before we move on. Is UK culture different from USA and therefore different morals? So this is sort of what I was broaching before. If we're to speak descriptively, and we would say that morality is a little bit different. A simple example of something that is not necessarily considered immoral but considered a very, very, very bad word in America is the word cunt. You guys can't even say it properly. Maybe that's why you hate it so much.
Yeah.
But in England, it's both a good and a bad word. If I was to go, all right, you horrible cunt, that's a really good thing to say. That's me telling you you're a really good friend of mine. But in America, that would always be taken as I'm insulting you in some way, shape, or form. So
It's either the best or the worst, right?
yeah,
In the UK,
yeah,
it's the best. Like your best mate, you'll call a cunt.
yeah, and your worst enemy.
Yeah.
So you know,
Or the toaster.
yeah. Yes, quite often the toaster, although not my new toaster. It's actually behaving very well.
I think
It
a
won't
different
last.
one that we could look at though is so in the UK, it would be considered immoral to carry a gun with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder
But
if
in the US, it wouldn't
no.
necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a touchy subject for a lot of Americans, isn't it? Because they're on
Yes.
very for or against on the gun side there, and I think generally over here we're very much on the unless you have a reason to have that gun, like you're going to a shooting range or something like that, or you're a farmer maybe. Uh, there's no reason for you to have this weapon. Um, I'd say we're more. It's more of a bit of a fear side for us, as well, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
So
like
that is
I've
an interesting thing because we would argue that we don't draw our morals from what is legal.
Yep.
We have had that discussion before, haven't we, Joe? Is that
Yep.
we wouldn't describe what is moral according to the law. But with the culture thing, with guns according to the UK and the US, I mean, the only real difference is the law.
Yeah, and the attitude around it. But then there are some
Yeah.
people who regard things like illicit substances as immoral because they're illegal. Some people do equate legality and law.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and I've seen it both from Americans and people in the UK that having the conversation about should we legalize it, would that make it right, and they go no because it's illegal. It's like, yeah, but if your only problem with it is that it's illegal and it was made legal, would that then stop you having a problem with it? No, because it's illegal. And you're like,
I think that happens more often. But the thing is, this is the thing. I think a lot of people have a very kind of rudimentary understanding of the law
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
don't understand the context behind that legislation. So they associate drugs with bad, and they don't see why that is. They don't understand the actual reasons behind that, why it was introduced that drugs were bad in the first place. And even if knowing that context, maybe they won't change their mind because it's always entrenched in them that drugs are bad. Don't do drugs. Yeah. So I think you see it a lot with things like Brexit and stuff, where it's people's feelings about something rather than their knowledge about something that directs their decisions and their political views and their views on what's right and wrong based on the law. So
I think the law gives one a very easy go-to without having to examine it yourself.
Yeah,
Here is a list of stuff that is wrong. I don't have to think about it now. If it's legal, it's fine. If it's on that big list there, it's wrong. And that's all the thought they'll ever put into it.
yeah,
my problem with
And
deontology.
Yeah.
but I've never known so many people to find protests or protests wrong. Like people used to be like, oh yeah, protests are a bit annoying and stuff, but now they're going, people should not protest, and it's because this law's come in recently, or this bill's come in recently that basically will make it illegal, and they're like, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
law.
Yeah,
The
it's
government are doing it.
being discussed at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's gone through a bunch
So,
of things, and now it's going to the House of Lords or something. I don't know, but it's like, but prior to
fucking
that becoming a
scary is what
law,
it is.
yeah, it is. Prior to that being a law, would people have found protests wrong? No.
Yeah. I think though, as you said, Chris, it's one of those things that it's easy for people, and I think that is the biggest issue when you're thinking about morality, because they don't even look into morality. They don't have much of an understanding of the law as it is. They just know, you say yes, no, and then they don't even think about the morality behind it, and they don't realize that it's different. And there's a lot of legislation that gets put in for business reasons, should we say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're economically based rather
That was very
than
tactful.
yeah. Yeah. Who am I? But there's a lot of things that like that are made illegal for no good reason in a personal safety sort of like law is supposed to protect the people, but quite often it's protecting a business or benefiting a business in some way, shape, or form. And as you say, if people don't have any understanding of that, then again, if they've only got this right, wrong sort of view of things, that's all they're going to think about. The question could come though: is breaking a law immoral? Now, I think all of us would argue that not necessarily. I think if it was,
Yeah.
murder, we'd probably say, well, yeah, it is. But I think we'd look at the actual situation and apply some standard to it that we would judge. You might go, well, it's illegal, so you shouldn't have done it, but it's not immoral because there's nothing wrong with actually doing it.
Breaking a law in and of itself isn't illegal, but the act that was breaking the law could be, which is kind of what I was trying to touch on in the group the other day. I made a post about if something is no longer illegal, should people who are in prison for it be released? If you think yes, does it depend on the severity of the crime?
Yeah, I think my response there was, I can understand that you've broken the rule, and that was the rule then, and so technically you did something wrong by that. But I even said, but I hate deontology for that reason, because I think there's more to things than following the rules. And I think if the law was based more on morality, so in an idealistic world where actually laws were based on morality, and we were then to go, actually, we've realized that this isn't immoral. So say, for example, they thought it was immoral to possess cannabis before, and therefore it was illegal. But then they realized, actually, you're not hurting anyone by having a little bit on your person. So we've realized something different. We've got a fourth person joining us. Then I've messed up the chat and stuff on that. Then we can quite easily say that maybe they should then be allowed to should be released. Sorry, and fully pardoned for their crime, or even have their record expunged because they are no longer doing something that is illegal in that regard. Or have done something they've realized, but that's only if it's tied to morality that closely. The point that Martin brought up though was if law is actually there, or the prison system is supposed to be for rehabilitation. So if you've put a murderer in, I know it's not how it works in practice, but a murderer goes good callback. I know it's not how it necessarily works in practice, but it's supposed to rehabilitate people and make them functioning parts of society. And if we realize that actually this wasn't wrong, there's nothing left to rehabilitate the person. So is prison about punishment? Oh yeah.
I made a comment after that, is that one could look at it as that you're trying to rehabilitate somebody from being the kind of person who would break a law.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the law is that was broken. You are the kind of person who would break the law, and that's what they're trying to rehabilitate. I don't think that that's valid.
I'm going to challenge the rehabilitation aspect of the prison system for a little bit as well.
Go for it.
So, is the prison system, or historically, is the prison system designed for rehabilitation, or is it designed for punishment?
Well,
historically speaking.
Yeah. I mean,
I would argue that it's definitely punishment.
punishment.
It's well, or even
historically
more
speaking.
keeping people safe from dangerous people. Like not even necessarily punishment, but just getting people off the streets as well.
Yeah, so I would argue that it started out as a way of separating out people from society who were dangerous, and then it evolved into a punishment thing and a justice thing, and now it's more based, or it's attempting to be more based around the
I think
rehabilitation aspect.
I think there's one easy way to demonstrate that, especially with lesser crimes, imprisonment is definitely for punishment, not for rehabilitation.
Oh yeah,
Because some crimes, when you break the law, they are punished with either prison time or a fine.
well, listen
And a
about
fine can't be rehabilitation. So
no,
if a crime can be one of those two things,
it's a deterrent.
it's a punishment. It can't not be, because you can't be rehabilitated from something by paying 300 quid to the courts.
Well,
Agreed.
let's think about the statue thing that just came in, right? Or is attempting to come in, where if you vandalize a statue in London for any reason or any in any way, you can draw a pen mark. You can get potentially a 10 years in prison, which is
Yeah.
more than the maximum sentence for sexual assault. So is that punishment or is that rehabilitation?
Yeah, well, I
Right?
think you say like a lot of it is supposed to be a deterrent, and I think that's one of the problems that we've actually seen through COVID is people aren't taught, this is why you should do the right thing. They're taught to avoid consequences.
Deterrents don't work. Yeah, deterrents
yeah.
don't work.
And
There's a thing I saw before which I found quite interesting as well, saying that if a crime is only punishable with a fine, you're essentially saying it's not illegal for rich people.
yeah, that's definitely right.
I
as
agree
well.
with that.
Yeah,
Especially unless the
that.
fine is percentage, like if it's a percentage
Yes.
of somebody's, but even then, like it's a percent, like £10,000 as 1% of somebody's income, compared to like what would that be? That would be £100,000 compared to like £100 compared to £1,000. Is that somebody with £100,000 is still going to have a lot more money, even if it is a
Oh,
percentage?
yeah, if Jeff Bezos had 50% of his income taken away for a year, he still wouldn't fucking struggle.
Yeah, exactly. He'd still have more money than he needs in his entire life.
Yeah, if I had 50% of my income taken for a year, I'd be homeless and probably starve to death.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, I think this is the thing about prison, is that it's a really odd thing because it doesn't really work. It just holds people for a number of years. They don't have the resources at the moment to actually put into place these rehabilitation strategies, and therefore people are coming out and their risk hasn't changed. They're still gonna have the same kind of ideas and stuff like that. Recidivism, yeah, they're going to reoffend.
Yeah,
they're absolutely going to reoffend. Yeah, and
but then again, you look at Scandinavian prisons where it looks like a hotel room and they get access to free education up to fucking degree level sometimes, and they've got such a low rate of recidivism.
Yeah.
Whereas America, you go and you're essentially a slave because they've got prisons for profit.
Well, we're getting prisons.
90% of the people go back in. Are we really?
Yeah. There's the number of private prisons has gone up a lot. Like a lot of American companies have bought out prisons and now running them as private. Serco has a bunch of prisons. G4S has a bunch of prisons.
I used to work actually.
Yeah, G4S has a prison that is was a child's prison, a young offenders institute, and it got shut down because of the abuse not too long ago. So yeah, we're having that over here now as well. So now it's not even prison as punishment. Now it's prison as
the workforce.
As a workforce, as productivity.
And it's absurd because, like I say, I used to work in a prison. I used to work in HMP Winchester.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like a prison guard or anything. It was what they called the cafe, but they give their shopping orders. And I was in a warehouse bagging up the orders that they put in and then going out and delivering it all. And the one thing I noticed that stuck out to me more than anything is because I was doing the deliveries, I was meeting the people, talking to them, having a chat with them. The difference between what they were like and what a lot of people you meet out in the street are like, they got caught.
Yeah. Well,
That's
this is why you have a disproportionate number of people in prisons that have lower than average intelligence or mental illness. It's because they can't cover their tracks as easily.
Yeah,
So people who are higher intelligence and stuff like that will be able to just cover over the fact that they've committed any crime and get away with it.
which also goes on to our later topic, is
Yeah.
why it's really, really bad to measure psychopathy as by criminals, because intelligent psychopaths won't be in prison.
Yep. Well, are we holding that off for a little bit longer?
Well, no,
Oh,
no,
I have a
no.
point about prisons. Sorry. So punishment versus rehabilitation, that will change whether somebody should be released based on if the law changes,
Yes.
right? So if they've
Yeah.
been punished for an act they committed in the past and they're continuing to be punished, then surely they won't be released for that act, even if it does become illegal. Whereas if it's about rehabilitation, then they will be released.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that's basically what we were saying. Yeah, I mean, but I think that's right though. I mean, generally the prison systems don't actually rehabilitate people, and that is the big problem with it. I mean, you made that point clearly, Chris, and I think that's very much all that can really be said and done about it. They need to change the entire way the prison system works. There is something that can be said about doing some work to earn their keep there, but I think it should be some work that helps them further a career in the future. So, for example, out of my arse, they learn blacksmithing and they start doing stuff like that for their sentence, and they start making a bit of money. They can use that for in the shop, etc. Get themselves stuff, and then when they come out, they've got themselves a qualification and can become a blacksmith. I don't know why blacksmithing is in my head, but you know, that sort of thing.
I like it. I like that idea. But I
They're
think
all
that
going
should
to
be an
learn.
internal economy. That economy shouldn't go outside. So this is the problem with prisons for profit, is that economy goes outside. So the kind of work that they do within prisons is work that then gets shipped. So you have a really low pay rate for them, and it's basically slavery. So yeah, which is not ideal, considering everyone I think agrees that slavery is immoral.
Indeed. Well, not everyone. I mean, in the past they didn't. And I think there's some people out there that have a different view on personhood and do see others as, well, others. They reduce their personhood so that they can do these things to them. I mean, there is still a hell of a lot of racism out there.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't take a lot to get to those psychological steps in order to get to that point, and as demonstrated by Nazi Germany, it really doesn't take much, and I think demonstrated by current UK, there's a lot of othering at the moment. There's a lot of dehumanization about illegal immigrants who are actually asylum seekers running away from a war that we've created in the Middle East. So it really doesn't take too many steps, and it doesn't take that much for a government to say, here's an other for you to blame for all your plights, for people to actually start blaming that other.
Agreed.
It's like the
Oh, we lost you there.
that I put up. Sorry, I said it's like that Terry Pratchett quote that I put up in the group. Do you remember that?
I do remember it. I don't remember what it was specifically, but
Hang on, I will find it.
Yeah,
because it was very.
That was one of the best things about Terry, though, wasn't it? Is the fact that he could just describe reality in such a way that it was satire, but it was so real as well. And it was great, absolutely great. I mean, sometimes I would be deluded into thinking that was reality because it was so alike to reality.
Here it is. So this is from the book I'm reading at the moment, Jingo. He said, "It was because he wanted there to be conspirators. It was much better to imagine men in some smoky room somewhere, made mad and cynical by privilege and power, plotting over the brandy. You had to cling to this sort of image, because if you didn't, then you might have to face the fact that bad things happen because ordinary people, the kind who brushed the dog and told their children bedtime stories, were capable of then going out and doing horrible things to other ordinary people. It was so much easier to blame it on them. It was bleakly depressing to think that they were us. If it was them, then nothing was anyone's fault.
Yeah.
If it was us, what did that make me? After all, I'm one of us. I must be. I've certainly never thought of myself as one of them. No one ever thinks of themselves as one of them. We're always one of us. It's them that do the bad things."
This is a really good point, actually. That perfectly described cognitive dissonance and the cognitive dissonance that people go through to commit atrocities. So I think I described it in the last one, but I'll describe it again. It's just having an idea or having multiple ideas that conflict with each other, and the ideas can result in behavior. So you might act a certain way that conflicts with like a thought that you have, or you might
Cognitive
have two thoughts.
dissonance is specifically the uncomfortable feeling. It's not
Yeah.
just having opposing thoughts.
No, so it's these opposing thoughts and then how they interact and then how
Yeah.
you resolve that. So in order to resolve your cognitive dissonance, you have to make sense of it and kind of like make excuses for one of the thoughts.
Yes.
So you can go either way. So if it's I believe that all humans are worthy of life, but I don't like black people, then the way that I do that is that black people are subhuman, right? And that's why
Yeah.
racist attitudes come out. So it's that kind of opinion, and it explains a lot of this kind of like these normal people doing atrocious acts and how they rationalize that in their brain. So, and this is
Also,
sorry, go on.
I'm just going to say the way that is done. So, like thinking of black people as less is also a tool that is manipulated by the press.
Yeah.
Like calling immigrants as vermin, so it
Yeah.
dehumanizes them.
Yeah, and that further helps people to resolve their own individual cognitive
Yeah.
dissonance about disliking them because it's justified by a thing they trust. It's crazy that people. Well, this is the reason that I don't trust it when people say I'm fully rational, because there's these
No
parts
one
of
is.
our. No one is.
No one
There's
is.
there's parts of our minds that we just aren't aware that are happening in order to do it, and you have to really be called out. And this is the thing that I was saying, Joe, as well. And I've seen it happen a few times now on Twitter, where you call someone out for trying to justify a certain behavior that isn't rational, or an argument that isn't rational, and then they kind of realize that that argument isn't rational, but they double down because
Oh, yeah.
because their cognitive dissonance is I'm right in this situation because I've always been right. He's just pointed out the fact I'm wrong. He must be stupid, and that's how they resolve this cognitive dissonance. And it comes
I
out.
had exactly this interaction today with a particular transphobe on one of my friend's Facebook walls.
Oh,
It's
really?
like, here's the science that shows you're wrong. It's like, I don't need my beliefs corrected. My beliefs are my own. But they're wrong, so they do need to be corrected. It's like, oh, thanks for mansplaining to me. It's like, fuck you.
What a cock.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite often the ones that I think you would be talking about, be seen on Twitter, is when someone makes a claim that they're always nice and they're a really good person, and then they turn around and they come on Twitter to let off steam and basically bully theists. And it's like, not really a nice behaviour, and then they deserve it. And then it just becomes. Sorry, go for it.
Sorry, and I don't want to. I'm not going to name names or anything because I don't think it's worth it. But there was someone that said you were stupid and you weren't even worth talking to, and then said, I think, and then followed up by saying that you had fired off insults, and I was like, he probably thinks you did fire off insults first, but clearly he was the first one to do it. So and that's just him probably thinking, I didn't do anything wrong. He was being a dick or whatever, but he took it down a notch. So, and it's that kind of thing. I don't think he thought he was lying.
No.
In effect, he was. You know.
No. He was telling a falsehood. If he genuinely believed what he was saying, then he wasn't lying. He was just telling a falsehood. And I am willing to concede that maybe he just royally fucked up. And to be fair, at the end of it, he did apologize.
He did.
So
Yeah.
that doesn't usually happen. But thankfully, evidence actually changed someone's mind for once. But yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. Was that yesterday or today?
Yeah, it was yesterday, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was they did insult me and then blocked me. And just because they'd done that, I posted the image saying, so is this how we atheists behave? Basically, we act eristically and insult someone who just asks questions. All I was doing was asking a question. I think the thing that caused him to insult me was going, what evidence would you expect? Or no, how would you detect a metaphysical being? That's what I asked. How would you detect a metaphysical being? I mean, there's plenty of ways you can answer that. They could have said, well, if this metaphysical being is supposed to be able to interact with the physical world, then we'd be able to see these physical results. So we'd have to have a look at that. Then they'd also have to concede, well, if it doesn't interact with the physical world, then there is no way we can do it. And then you could even follow it up, but then if it's not interacting with us at all, it may as well not exist. And I'd have had any of those sorts of conversations. I'd have gone, yeah, I'd agree with you. But it wasn't. It was just an instant, you're an idiot, you're so stupid, you're not worth talking to. Block. Okay.
It does somewhat depend on what question you ask them, though. If you ask them, do you realise how fucking stupid you are? Then fair enough.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you can do it that way. Hey, Dave, how you doing? You can jump on if you want. We've covered off most of the morality part, but we're going to be getting onto psychopathy shortly.
I'm so excited.
That's going to take 2 seconds.
Chris knows what she's talking about as well, so
Vaguely, at least.
Hey, Vikings as well. Right. Well, I tell you what. If we're going to move on to psychopathy. Does everyone want to go and get themselves a refill?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's put ourselves on to Be Right Back, and let's go for the most anger-inducing Be Right Back screen I have as well.
Dancing trumpet. That's going quite quickly this time, actually.
Excuse me.
Bouncing. And if you like Joe's black and white anti-Joe, I will have to send you one or add it on at the end.
I love anti-jokes so much.
I've got one that I absolutely adore, and it's fucking stupid.
We're back in the room. Hello. Dave, if you're up for it, feel free to jump on. If not, we understand. I know you've been busy doing your assignment. Hopefully, you managed to get it finished. Yeah, Dave's had a hectic couple of weeks with his latest degree. So he finished his masters last year in philosophy and got distinction, and now he's doing a bachelor's in computer science. So he's just collecting degrees. I don't know. It's like Pokemon
I wish I
for
could
him.
collect degrees like that. I'd love it.
Yeah. But yeah. So just to recap briefly on the morality point, we were talking about how a lot of the terminology is similar, but it's used slightly differently at the same time.
Yeah.
And within psychology, you're more talking about morality from an individual perspective and how the individual might interact within a group, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I'll just say I don't think psychology necessarily makes any value judgments about morality. It takes kind of the culture's value of that, which is why there were so many unethical studies in the past.
Fair. So it using psychology in regards to morality, it sort of takes a more of a descriptive approach, if you will, if we were to put it through a psychological lens, or a philosophical lens is what I meant. Which is great. I mean, it also, if you're talking about evolutionary psychology, you're going to be talking about how morality came to be and how it evolved. In fact, we've got currently watching, I believe, an evolutionary biologist as well. I was having a chat with him earlier on today. We were having some of the conversation we've had tonight, and I'd love to facilitate a conversation between the two of you.
That's good.
Yeah. Because obviously understand a hell of a lot more of the psychology than me. I think that I could give a basic overview of what I understand, but I'm sure you understand more of the nitty-gritty than I do. So that would be a really good one to have on maybe the next big stream that we all do together. If you're up for it, Three Vikings, that's your invite. But yeah, so other than that, we covered off things like the experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, which is covered off in the film The Experiment. So, have you seen it?
The film. I'll tell you what the film does. The film dramatizes it.
Of course, it's a film. It's for entertainment
Yeah,
purposes.
yeah, but like I know so many people that are like, "Oh my god, have you seen the Stanford Prison Experiment movie?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and they're like, "How bad was it?" And I was like, "It wasn't that bad. Like it was never that bad."
Yeah, I guess so. We believe people can be that bad. That says a lot about us. Yeah, I wouldn't put it past them if that was exactly how it happened. People are wankers. And other than that, we covered off a few other bits about morality, and we dipped our toes into the prison system and how it doesn't work, how it ought to rehabilitate, but it doesn't. We did a few bit on in-group bias and othering people, and how we see that happen online, as well as cognitive dissonance. So we've actually covered off a fair chunk on our first section, and now we are going to be looping in to psychopathy. So,
Yay.
And this will also loop back into our conversation on morality as well. But Luke, what do we
Yes.
mean by psychopathy?
I think so. Let's start with the etymology because I know we love a bit of etymology here,
It means
and
someone
you'd
who
be.
eats sandwiches.
I'll tell you what, psychopathy does not mean what it originally means. So there you go. There's some little bit more evidence, and it comes from Greek. So obviously you have the Greek word psych, which is Greek for mind, soul, that kind of thing, which is where psychology, study of mind, comes from. And then pathy, path being like an illness or something wrong. So psychopathy is an illness of the mind.
Hmm.
And there's still a phrase psychopathology, which is the study of illness of the mind, which is about mental illness and stuff.
Which
But
is needlessly confusing.
which is massively confusing because that's not what psychopathy is.
Yeah.
That doesn't just talk about psychopathy. So what happened was, um,
The Earl of Sandwich
in
came in.
the sandwich came in. I feel like we need to explain that now. We've mentioned it twice.
Yes, please.
So basically, we I now just send random things to Joe about words that don't mean the original thing that they were meant for. So I said the etymology of sandwich. Sandwich is just a place in Kent, and I don't know why it's called Sandwich, but it's a place in Kent. And there was an Earl of Sandwich, and he wanted to make a lazy food, essentially. So he asked for meat between two slices of bread, and then the sandwich was invented.
Apocryphally, it was because he didn't want to get meat juices on his playing cards, I believe.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what you said in the
Yeah.
chat.
Fairly
Yeah.
certain it's apocryphal, not true, but
I just know.
who
Like,
cares?
either way, but sandwich doesn't mean to have things squished, but it does mean that now. Like, you can have things sandwiched between each other, or like you can be sandwiched in a parking spot or something like that. And the etymology doesn't add up to the current use.
Hmm.
So I just keep sending these random things to Joe about like
Yeah.
just because I find it funny. Um, so yeah, so psychopathy now. So the original study of psychopathy happened in like I want to say the early 1930s to 1950s. And it was a guy called Cleckley who is known for studying like multiple personality disorder and other things like that. And he brought out a book called, oh my God, what's it called? The Mask of Sanity? It's called The Mask of Sanity.
Yes,
Very good
I
book.
know that one.
Yeah, so and in it he details some case studies, a lot of case studies about what psychopathy is. So all these psychopaths, and they are related to people. So he describes a psychopath as somebody who has what appears to be a mental illness without having any obvious traits of mental illness. So not somebody who's psychotic. So not somebody who's seeing delusions or having hallucinations. Not somebody who's got a mood disorder like depression or mania. Not somebody who's got a female disorder like what was it called? Hysteria. That was common back then. So all these things. So essentially, what psychopathy was all of our understanding now of personality disorders. So they would include people with emotionally unstable personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and each thing is about how these people cause relative amounts of like kind of chaos in their lives because of their unstable personality traits or antisocial personality traits or narcissistic personality traits. And then they would need to be hospitalized, but they wouldn't stay hospitalized for very long because they didn't actually have any kind of mental illness. And then they'd be discharged and then they'd go through the same cycle. So that's the original form of what a psychopath is. And it's changed since then. So
So that's what it's
do you have any
not
questions
anymore.
so far? It's not that anymore. But
That's
do you
all
have any
those things
questions
it's
so
not.
far? Because that's a lot. That's a lot. So that's the premise.
My mind's stuck on sandwiches. I'm just wondering if there is a sandwich favored by psychopaths.
There are definitely questions I will have, but
Yeah. Not at this
not
Okay,
as
right, so let's-
so far.
Let's move on to what a psychopath is now. So, basically, there's a book called DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it basically has in it all of these diagnoses and how to evaluate them. And it started talking about personality disorders and defining personality disorders. And Bob Hare, who is like the psychopath expert, saw the
I'm going
DSM.
to bring him up.
Yeah, he's the person to bring up. And he wasn't happy that psychopath wasn't included anymore because he saw this thing that was basically absent from the DSM. The closest thing in the DSM is antisocial personality disorder,
Mhm.
but even that's got some things missing. So he devised a checklist.
ECLR, yeah?
PCLR, yeah. So it's the psychopath checklist reviewed or revised. Sorry,
Revised, yeah.
And this checklist basically has details. I can't remember how many elements there are, but it's a
There's
detailed
20 questions.
See, I couldn't do this alone. So there's 20 questions, and they're all marked out of 3. Yeah, so you have 0, 1.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, 1, 0, 1 to 2.
Yeah.
So you can score 1 if it's some of the time, 0 if it's none of the time, and then 2 if it's like a lot of the time. And based on this score, if it's over like 24, I think it is, then you get.
It depends on the country.
Yeah, Scotland is 22.
Yeah, and it also depends on whether it's for a diagnosis or for study. For
Right.
studies, it's 22 in England, but for a diagnosis, you need to be above 25, I believe, possibly 24. Unless that's changed. It's a few years since I've looked, but it's different in England and America.
So the idea is that you get the score and then you get diagnosed with as being a psychopath. But the really important thing is that it's not a medical diagnosis. So you can't be medically diagnosed as a psychopath. What it's used as is a risk assessment tool in prisons in order to see if somebody is suitable for discharge, essentially. But the problem with that is that Bob Hare doesn't like that approach to it. He wants it to be used like in. He has a book called Snakes in Suits, which is a very good book. So it's about corporate psychopaths. So he wants it to be used in corporations to see if there's people in corporations that are psychopaths who are like basically killing the economy in order for their own personal gain and stuff. Which is one of the key factors on the list. Is this kind of like self?
Yeah. So some of the questions on the PCLR will be things like how often you commit crimes, how well you kind of emotionally attach to people, whether, and this kind of thing. It's trying to measure things like empathy and criminal tendency.
A key thing about this is that so Hannibal Lecter is not considered a psychopath based on this test. So our traditional view of what a psychopath is, based on like the media and that, is completely distorted from what a psychopath looks like in reality. It's a lot less kind of like dramatic than that. They'll have a bit of a superficial charm. They might dress up. They'll try and manipulate you. They won't care much about what you do, what about your life or anything like that, even though they appear to. They'll want to get stuff out of you and stuff, but the killing aspect of it is very kind of like very rare, essentially.
Yeah, a lot of psychopaths might kill you if it was
necessary,
but they're unlikely to find specific joy in just the act of murder. They just wouldn't give two shits about whether they had to do it or not.
In fact, flat affect is part of it. So flat affect is having not very extreme moods. So if they found joy in killing you, then that would be unusual. They probably wouldn't score on that part of the PCLR. So
that actually marries into somewhat of a hypothesis I have about psychopathy, which I've never actually managed to discuss with anybody who might know what they're talking about. So get ready. Here we
can have that. That's what we're here for. Oh,
no,
can I make one clear distinction as well?
No.
Psychopaths. Oh, okay, fine. Goodbye, Joe. Psychopaths do understand that other people have emotions and they understand what those emotions might feel like. They don't care about what those emotions feel like to that person.
This is part of what I was going to go into as well.
Well, let's go into it.
I just want to touch on that very briefly as well, is that one of the notions about psychopathy is that they don't have any empathy.
Yeah.
And that has been proven to not be true. Psychopaths tend to have what is called an empathy switch, is they can choose to be empathetic, but they generally consider that to be more hassle than not being empathetic, so the switch will normally be set to off. But the whole lack of empathy thing is kind of what goes into my thought hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, is some psychopaths at least are very sadistic. And I would argue that sadism requires empathy, because you still need to be able to put yourself in that person's position to be able to enjoy the pain that they're going through. If you don't have any empathy, then you don't understand their suffering.
Yeah,
so
it's almost like a reverse empathy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still empathy. It's just you're attaching a different emotion to it.
I think empathy is the wrong word to describe psychopaths. I think it's a loaded word that doesn't actually describe the kind of the thing that they lack. I think compassion is a better word to describe it. I think they understand people can have emotions. They understand what those emotions are. They can even, like you say, put themselves in other people's shoes and stuff. They don't give a shit. That's the thing. Or they do give a shit, but it's because they get something out of it. It's very much like centered around their wants and their needs and stuff. There was a great interview that I saw with a female psychopath, which is very unusual actually, where she was like talking to someone who was pregnant. One of her friends was pregnant, and she was like, I just didn't understand how this person could cope with having a baby inside them for 9 months, because why would you want to do that? It's such a like it was very kind of cold. It was very much, I just don't understand their emotions or why they care about this baby or why they care about having a family or anything like that. I just want to make money and I just want to like rise to the top and be important, and that was it. And they just,
do you know the name of the person?
Sorry,
I can't remember. It was on a documentary
that I watched years ago. I cannot remember, unfortunately.
Just wondering if it might have been somebody who wrote one of the books that I tried to read and couldn't get through it. A woman called M.E. Thomas wrote a book called Confessions of a Sociopath. And, that's one I couldn't get through.
It might be,
all seemed very performative.
Oh yeah, that's the thing as well, is that they like to show off a little bit, don't they? I think they like the attention of that stuff. It's very interesting because I think psychopaths are way less dangerous mostly than TV makes them out to be, but they love that kind of like that attention and that kind of like recognition and that like resources and stuff like that they'll get from it. So,
well, it depends, doesn't it? Because that whole top 10 psychopath professions and stuff, a lot of it is feelings of power.
yes.
So while we tend to see it portrayed in media that they're getting power by abuse and murder and stuff, the number of surgeons who are psychopaths is through the fucking roof. And if you ask me, good. Because I don't want my surgeon to be emotionally invested and wondering about whether their next move is the right thing and might this kill them, might just, no, get in, do the job. I don't give a shit if you're doing this job because it makes you feel powerful. I give a shit if you're good at it or not.
Yeah, and that's a good point actually as well, because I feel like a lot of the jobs that psychopaths tend to take are high intensity jobs. So
fireman.
Yeah.
Policeman.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, surgeon or any form of doctor where they have control over your life anyway.
So I've just brought up the list. Is that the full list?
I bet most of them are high intensity.
So CEO,
That's
Yeah.
got to be high intensity, right?
That's number one.
Yeah, of course it is.
I've just moved up the
Politician?
first list I was on.
There are
I've got
definitely some
4,
psychopath
5.
politicians.
So I've got 8 of the 10 listed for some reason,
That's fine.
and it takes me through to a different page if I click on it. CEO number 1, lawyer number 2.
Yeah.
They do that so that they can stop Joe from moving. Media, TV or radio, then salesperson, surgeon, journalist, police officer, and then clergy at number 8.
Ooh, clergy.
Yeah.
I tell you,
Well,
I
you've got
have a
power over-
hypothesis around that.
Oh yeah.
But before we get to that, this is high intensity stuff, right? So because they have a flat affect, in order to achieve the same level of like adrenaline rush that we get from kind of like everyday situations, they need to do a lot more. So in order to kind of feel something, they'll put themselves in high intensity situations, and like jobs like being a surgeon or a fireman or a policeman or something like that will have that frequently. So they'll be able to actually feel that rush that we don't get.
Yeah.
The clergy, I think, is maybe a moral thing where psychopaths feel like, because they don't give a shit and they don't care, they need to find a way or find a different solution to that. Maybe they're looking towards religion.
Nicer justification than I'd give it.
Well, yeah, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt a little bit, but I feel like that might be part of it. Oh, do you think
being able to? Yeah, definitely. Being able to stand in front of a room of people once a week and inform them of what they should believe and how they should live their life.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be more than once a week
I
as
think
well,
yours
wouldn't it?
is
It'd be
right,
every
actually.
service, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah.
I think yours is right.
Yeah.
I think yours is right.
I like the optimism.
I tried.
It's good to try and be charitable, isn't it? Maybe slightly misplaced when we're talking about psychopaths in that regard, especially ones in clergy. In the clergy.
This is the thing. I think that they've been given a bit of a bad rap. I do think there are some dangerous ones. CEOs are the most dangerous ones, and politician psychopaths are the most dangerous ones, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Much more dangerous than the ones that go around murdering, in my opinion, because they cause a lot more devastation, economic collapse, and stuff.
Is there a link between what
psychopath
they
who
do
goes
and
around-
their intelligence?
So yes, actually there is. So the people who are less intelligent psychopaths tend to become more violent offenders and tend to have more like drinking problems and stuff like that, and might become like the murderers and stuff. But it'll be the ones who get caught. There's like and I don't know if this is due to testing or because it's prison, but there's like an over representation of psychopathic people in prison than compared to our prison.
What I heard statistically for prison numbers was that roughly, I think it was 4% of prisoners are psychopaths, and roughly 20% of all prison violence is due to psychopaths.
Yeah, that's the thing you get with this thing is like what we call what they called super. I can't remember, but it's basically this happens in society as well. You get like 2 or 3% of the population committing like 80% of the crime. It's a really small number of the population, so it might seem like an area has a lot of criminals, but actually it's only like 3 or 4 people, and they're just doing all the crime in that area.
That makes sense.
And that's the same in prisons. That's the same in pretty much all societies and stuff. So psychopaths, if they're more intelligent, then they're more likely to become corporate psychopaths because they can get that power and control in a way that is less destructive or less obvious, and they won't go to prison and stuff.
Potentially more power.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
But there's something I want to ask you about as well. Is I know there's a couple of different schools of thought on it. Your opinion, at least, the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath.
I think sociopath is a made-up thing.
Why?
because right. So I think that the concept is that sociopaths are psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. So the concept
That's
is
the
that
one that I'd
sociopaths
go with.
develop these things. I think that the
Or to
media.
put it another way would be that psychopathy is due to a physical neurological difference and sociopathy is to do with a learned behavior.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's we've figured out how to separate the two. So whether it's personality or intrinsic personality, genetic factors, or whether it's like nurture in early life. And I
Yeah.
would say that it's not a very useful like difference to use, in my
That's
opinion.
that's the distinction that I have always gone with. But there's a different test. I'm trying to find what it
Is there a different
was.
test in the PCLR?
Yes. But where was it? But then that measures primary and secondary psychopathy. And some people would say that one of those is psychopathy and one is sociopathy.
Yeah, I suppose I understand your point. There's no meaningful difference between the two. Essentially, is that even though you can understand the conceptual difference between the two, there's no real meaningful difference between the two. Is that right, Luke?
In my opinion, yeah, and I think that Bob Hare takes that approach as well. I think that the psychopathic sociopathic divide is something more rooted in to
Literature.
media and literature.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that in terms of like functionality of assessments within like the prison system or the mental health system, it doesn't tend to be used. We have the PCLR, and that's the one that's used in the UK.
The one that I was looking at was the Levinson self-report psychopathy scale, and that measures what it calls primary and secondary psychopathy.
Okay. I tell you what, we'll have another chat after I've looked into that. So you shoot that over to me in a message somewhere, and I will read it, and then I'll come back to you with my thoughts, because I haven't read that. The main stuff I've learned about the psychopath stuff is PCLR, Bob Hare's stuff, and the historical stuff with Cleckley.
I didn't do the video.
Some good books though.
Stupid.
I don't know if have you read Without Conscience?
No, I've only read a couple. I've read the Kevin Dutton one, which I thought was brilliant.
I'm gonna give you a read.
And I've tried to read Confessions of a Psychopath, and I found one completely insufferable. I read one called The Psychopath Test by an author called John Ronson, who you may have heard of.
That's a really good book. It's an amazing book.
If other people don't know who he is, if you have heard of a film called The Men Who Stare at Goats, that's
a great
based
film.
on a book that he wrote.
And he has a TED talk based on the psychopath test. So
yes, which is very interesting.
Yeah,
I love that book. One that I've been meaning to read, but I never have managed to get around to picking up, is by a neuroscientist called James Fallon. Have you heard of him? So this is a book called The Psychopath Inside. And what he was doing essentially was fMRI tests looking for psychopathy. And then he did one of his own brain as a control and realised that he's a psychopath.
I've heard of this,
Yeah, he'd been living as a psychopath his entire life and didn't realise.
We spoke about the fMRI. We spoke about it.
Yeah.
There's so many issues there. It's like him going, maybe I never loved my wife.
But yeah, he's written a book about this whole thing. It's called The
I'll have to
Psychopath
read. I'll have to
Inside.
read it, obviously, because yeah. So that's a really good. Thank you. And reading for you, Without Conscience, Bob Hare's, like basically the book that the practitioners that do Bob Hare's test run off of. I was going to suggest The Psychopath Test by John Robson, John
John
Ronson,
Bronson. Yeah.
Ron Johnson. Yeah, him.
Ron Jeremy.
That's good. Um, the book that I suggested
It's more my
earlier,
kind of
the
book.
actually one that's good for the historical stuff, about reading like about where it came from and stuff, and how it's
The Mask of Sanity.
Mask of Sanity. Yeah, it's a bit dry. It's a lot of case studies, so it's just one of those things you dip in and out of, not in one go. Because I tried that and it almost bored me to death. But it's very the actual case studies are great. And then Snakes and Suits, which is another Bob Hare book, very good.
Yeah, I highly recommend picking up The Wisdom of Psychopaths.
I will.
Andy McNabb is the guy's name I was trying to remember. Yes, who they actually do a book together as well called The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success.
You're gonna have to like put them in Discord or something like that, and I'll get links and try and remember to put it in the comments. Anyone who's interested in reading those as well can find them quite easily on Amazon or something like that. And
Yep.
maybe it's something we should do actually if we've got time. It's something I've been talking about with Dave when I finally got a bit more normality in my life. I'd actually like us to maybe once a month do a book review type thing, sort of discuss the concepts that were within it.
Book club.
What?
We can do a book club.
Oh, book club. Yeah. But yeah, I think that'd be something that'd be quite entertaining to do, especially with a topic like this as well. But obviously, it's gonna rely on actually having time to do this sort of thing. So once the move's done, and once I've caught up on my pile of books, and as soon as I've caught up on my pile of books that I've got in a box somewhere, I'll know whether I'm going to have time to actually put this idea forward. Now, we actually had a great question from Three Vikings. Are any other primates psychopaths?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's tough to
Yes.
tell. It's tough to tell from like our understanding of what psychopathy is, but chimpanzees, a lot of them show very strong psychopathic tendencies, especially like the regular chimpanzees, so not bonobos, regular chimpanzees, because they're very hierarchical. They will demonstrate like self-centered behavior, chaotic behavior. They'd kill their fellow chimps in their troop in order to kind of gain power and stuff like that. So chimps specifically, I think, show quite strong psychopathic tendencies. If we were to use our understanding of it and not be able to actually ask some questions about what they're feeling.
I think that's one of the things that always happens. Like when we talk about morality of animals as well, they don't process things in the same way. They don't understand morality as the way we do. So we personify their behaviors and they say, oh, well, they're acting morally, but we don't actually know if they are. It's much
that kind of anthropomorphism isn't really useful.
No, but I mean, but equally, it might be. If they actually do understand it and we just don't know that they understand it, then maybe it is useful. But that's the problem. We don't know either way.
I guess the difference between like chimpanzees and like the rest of the great apes is that they're a lot more kind of like malicious and insidious about their like approach to power. So whereas like a gorilla, it will be a fight, but it will not necessarily a fight to the death. To become like the head of a family, and then it's very much like balanced and peaceful and stuff like that. Chimps are fighting all the time, and they have wars and stuff like that. So they're like a lot more violent than any other great ape.
Back to reading list link in the Discord if people want it.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, wicked. It's come through to the chat. Obviously, people might not be able to click on that, but if any of you are in the Discord link, it's in the live one. There's quite a few in there. Thank you for doing that, Chris.
No worries. But so another thing that I find quite interesting when we look at it as well is the idea that psychopathy could have actually been quite a useful tool for us on an evolutionary perspective. If we look back to when we were talking about before, when we were small tribes in little mud hut villages, it was rather useful to have the kind of person who, when the bushes started rustling and that might be 10 big fucking lions coming out of it, wasn't scared to stand on the perimeter with a big pointed stick.
Yeah, makes sense. Equally, our resources are running low. There's that tribe there. Let's take theirs. Fuck them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things like that do make sense from an evolutionary perspective. It's one of those things that make less sense now, but because it's already ingrained within people and it's not causing people to not procreate, it's not being bred out. I wonder percentage-wise, though, if there used to be a higher percentage than there is now, because like you were saying, Luke, you were saying that why would you have kids, so on and so forth. Now, some might see it from a power point of view, where I get to have power over these children. Some might not care about someone and just fuck and get people pregnant and whatever. But they might be less inclined to procreate in the way that they would have before. So percentage wise, is that decreasing? I know there's more and more people, so the number might be going up, but is the
From
percentage...
procreation, like you were just saying, I don't imagine many psychopaths would be too concerned about having a lot of unprotected one night stands.
I would say that's actually, I think that's a thing on the PCLR. I think that's one of the criteria is
promiscuity. Yes, it is.
promiscuity.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it is probably more likely that it's that accidental kind of like having a bunch of children you don't know, like Genghis Khan.
There's also
Johnson.
there's a significant possibility as well, is that so they say that there's roughly 2% of the population are psychopaths, but because of the way that the PCLR does work, and it does have quite a focus on criminality, not purely. And if you're not a criminal, you may well tick other things on the list that put you over that score. But it could be much higher than 2% if the test was designed in a way that it didn't have such a strong focus on that criminality. Because there are many other things, like we were saying, like CEOs and lawyers and policemen who might not break the law at all. They might have an ultimate respect for the law for some rather different and probably misguided reason. But I think that aspect of the test does need to be rethought somewhat.
I think he kind of half addresses that in the Snakes in Suits book.
Yeah, does he?
So
excellent.
Yeah, he talks about it as an issue with the test. If I remember rightly, it's been a while since I've read it, but yeah, it's kind of acknowledged that because these people are in positions of power where they can do things lawfully, or they can get away with this illegal behavior because like tax evasion, stuff like that, or like firing people outside of their contract and stuff like that, because they can get away with it, then it's not being registered as unlawful behavior. So when they go to do PCLR, it's not registering on the thing. So.
And another aspect is if a psychopath has read one of these books and cotton on to the fact that they're being given the PCLR, I bet you any money you fucking want that they'll pass and not be diagnosed.
Oh yeah, 100%. This is the problem with self-report tests in general, is that I could go do a self-report test for depression, and seem like the most depressed person in the world because it's all based on my points. And I think that's the difference between the PCLR. The PCLR tries to be a bit more objective about that stuff, where it's like
with the self-report one, I score anything between 23 and 26, depending on how forgiving I'm feeling.
Is that high?
Yeah. I was questioned for it when I was a teenager. I think that was somewhat of a misunderstanding of undiagnosed autism.
Right. So this is actually a point I wanted to bring up. Autism, because autism has people with autism have problems with theory of mind. So there's difficulties in understanding other people have different minds to theirs and different opinions and different thoughts and stuff like that. And that comes across like a lack of empathy, and that causes people to mix up psychopathy and autism a lot, because it seems like, oh, you're saying this thing or you're doing this thing because you don't care about me. But if you told them in a way that they understood that hurts me or something, then they might be like, okay, I don't want to hurt you. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah, it's not being callous.
Yeah.
It's just not getting that it did the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do it often.
What was that test that we did a few years back?
That was probably the PCLR.
No, it gave you the breakdown of whether you're how borderline, narcissistic personality disorder, and it gave
the dark triad.
It wasn't the dark triad, no, because that gives you the rating of the 3. It gave you the rating of 10 different ones, I think it was. And
I don't remember
every time and we used to weight it as well, and we added a point system to it. And I somewhere in the AiR group, I tell you what, Luke, you should take it. The weird thing was, though, I've always scored really, really poorly on this test until the last time I took it, which suddenly, like, it was like, I guess I must have been in a good mood that day or something like that. And it was. I think part of the problem with it was the ambiguity in the test, actually, because sometimes it was like, have you ever done this thing? And it was like, well, do I answer it because I did that thing once 20 years ago? Or do I go, well, no, because it's not something I currently do? And I think in the last test I did, it was apart from one personality disorder, all my others seemed to have disappeared. But when we took it last time, you and I, point system-wise, were level, but there were certain
pretty much.
Yeah.
I think we had a discussion, didn't we? It's like, if it wasn't within the last 18 months, we were going to mark it down as no.
Yeah.
This is the problem with self-diagnosis, though, and I see this a lot. Around, especially in psychology students. Half of psychology students go to do a psychology degree in order to understand themselves rather than other people. And self-diagnosis, I think, is one of the most I don't want to say dangerous, but as along those lines, kind of things you can do, because you start to pathologize normal behavior that you do. So you might be a bit disorganized. You might feel a bit of worry when something happens, like you go to a social event or something, and that can be quite normal. And then you start to think, oh, you see anxiety in social situations, and you're like, wait, I feel a bit anxious when I'm in social situations.
Yeah.
And then that perpetuates it again and again. Whereas actually, that's a normal piece of worry that you get when you're in. It's good to be worried in those situations because you got to be on guard. So it's when it becomes disorderly that it becomes a disorder.
Yes. So, like, I have been diagnosed with. I've been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, not because I feel a bit anxious, because if it's really noisy, I'll have a full-blown panic attack in the middle of a fucking restaurant, because I can't process the sounds anymore, and fuck what's going on, and oh shit, I'm dying and can't breathe.
You brought that one up a couple of weeks ago, didn't you, Luke? Actually, as one of the examples on the stream. And I get that one. It's interesting, the people who conflate having, either, for example, feeling a little bit depressed occasionally with depression, and feeling a little bit anxious with an anxiety disorder. and all of these things, because we all are, we're emotional beings at the end of the day, unless we're psychopaths, yes. So we're all going to experience these things at some point. So in that regard, yeah, as you say, that the self-diagnosis bit can be a bit of a problem, and then you can build yourself into a worse state because
self-fulfilling
fulfilling
prophecy.
prophecy. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen loads of times.
End up being diagnosed with anxiety because you're anxious about the fact that you might have anxiety.
Yeah, and you start to think, "Oh,
I
I'm having
don't want to
anxiety,
victim blame
therefore."
people, but
No, it's not. It's not like that.
it's
Because there
kind
are
of your
people
own
that have
fault,
genuine
mate.
anxiety. There are people that have genuine anxiety, but some people, like, so for instance, someone I am aware of. I'm not that close to her, but she's recently started saying that she has autism, and uh, I've met her, and I've met a lot of. I work with autistic people and stuff. I would say the thing she changes the diagnosis that she has fairly regularly. So she'll say, "Oh, I've got severe depression. I've got generalized anxiety disorder. I've got autism. I've got um, social social anxiety disorder. I've got seasonal affective disorder." So that says to me that she has
NPD.
emotional unstable personality disorder. So
Munchausen.
or Munchausen's by proxy, yeah. So um, I think
Is it by
the
proxy when you do it to somebody else?
oh yes, that is yes,
That's
you're
like
right.
doing it to your kid, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So Munchausen's by proxy is when you do it to someone else, and then Munchausen's is when you do it to yourself. But this is a key thing about emotional unstable personality disorder, actually, or borderline personality disorder, is that it has people, because they have an unstable sense of self, and they experience sharp emotional changes. They start to recognize those issues that they have as other illnesses, and then start to because they feel like that's the way that they should act, because they're identifying them with the diagnosis rather than their sense of self. They start to experience those symptoms worse. So they might
It's the
experience worse.
WebMD of personality disorders.
Yeah,
Like, oh shit, I've got that and that and that. Oh god. All I
yeah,
did is I
well,
clicked
yeah,
on I've
no,
got a
it is.
headache.
It is, and it's really it's difficult because it makes you feel like they're not being genuine, but they're not being genuine either. It's really difficult to kind of understand and to try and help somebody. But like it does. I mean, eventually you can. Once you get that diagnosis of emotional unstable personality disorder, and they identify with that, it is able to go through better like therapeutic interventions that
It
suit them.
starts to kind of like bring the net in, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. Rather than having this kind of like kind of trying to figure out exactly what's going on with all these pieces of information or these symptoms. So
That makes sense. Because yeah,
emotional unstable personality disorder is the most complex disorder I've met people, and it's very common as well.
not one I've heard of.
It's borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, borderline.
Yes.
That was on the
Yeah, it's the
test that
same
we were
thing.
doing.
It
Okay.
just got renamed.
Yeah, so I've actually
because it's
found
borderline.
the test within the Answers in Reason group as well, actually. So
Excellent.
Oh, is that the thing you just tagged me in?
yeah, that's what I tagged you in. You don't have to check it out
Okay.
now, but
I'll
like
do
check it out, because I looked at the thing. So 4 years ago, I took the test. 2 years later, I
Oh.
took it, and I was much less crazy. So another 2 years on, I really wonder if I am.
You can
know,
do that on a Thursday. Do that this Thursday.
well, we should all sit down and take the test together. That's a great idea. Well, you've got to come back for that then. We'll all take the test
I'd
online.
have to check.
We'll have to do that on another Tuesday then.
All right, okay, we can save it for another week. We won't do it Thursday. We'll do it Tuesday. Or something. We get everybody doing the test together and posting their results. But yeah, I mean, when I first took the test, I mean, it was like, I'm moderately paranoid, I'm high schizoid, high schizotypical, moderately antisocial, very high borderline, moderately histrionic, high narcissistic, high avoidant, low dependency, and moderately obsessive compulsive, right? So that was what I did 4 years ago. And then 2 years on, I'm moderately paranoid, moderately schizoid, highly schizotypical, moderately antisocial, moderately borderline, low histrionic, moderately narcissistic, moderately avoidant, low dependent, and moderately obsessive compulsive. I mean, I'm still quite fucked, but it's a massive shift when you, especially when we put it down into points as we did. We rated everything that we did. We had a weighting system and scored ourselves, and yeah, Chris thought he was winning. She was winning, sorry. And it was actually a draw originally, but you did end up winning on the retake.
Wow.
You'll have
Histrionic
to-
is one of those most interesting personality types.
I've
Have you
never
ever
really
met someone?
understood
You
what
probably-
it is.
Histrionic is like where somebody acts like they're in a play or something like that. They're very much about acting and overemphasizing something. So if somebody's histrionic, you might think that they're like I used to live with someone who I would class as histrionic, and he was very much like, get the port glasses and oh yes, the cheese boards. And like he would be like big and stuff, and it'd be very dramatic. And it's like it's everything's a drama, but like it's theatrical drama, not like not dramatic like YouTube drama.
I do love a cheese board though.
You have porch glasses, and you have to use the cheese knife. I would say Boris Johnson's histrionic. I think Boris Johnson's histrionic and narcissistic.
Yeah, I
Quite
could go
possibly a psychopath.
And almost certainly a psychopath, yes.
So I'm just going to post a link to the group and that particular post to anyone that wants to take the quiz. But yeah, we'll save it for another Tuesday if you want to do it live on air with us. On air with AiR. Be interesting.
Something I want to get onto as well, as we're getting fairly late, now that we've got Dave with us, is so for the two of our specialists here, as it were, how would we think of psychopathy relating to morality from either a psychological or a philosophical point?
Go, Dave.
From a moral sort of philosophical sort of point, it would just be whether or not they behaved in certain ways. It wouldn't really look at the underlying reasons for their particular behavior. So it would be the moral system would determine whether or not they are behaving morally, and that would be as far as it goes.
From their own personal perspective, would we consider them to be acting morally or immorally? Or because they don't really think about it in that way, would it be amorally?
Well, that's one of the things I was just about to bring up is something like the ought implies can sort of distinction where if they can't behave morally because it's just not in their psychology, then could it be said that they're behaving immorally? Probably not. I'm not sure I would call it amoral because it's acting without morals. They would still be classified as moral or immoral based on their behavior, but if you take in the psychology, so it would really depend on the moral system that's being used to determine the actions. I mean, if you were to go with like an emotivist response, then they would just be behaving morally because they believe, or if they didn't believe, they were behaving morally.
Yeah.
I guess from a psychological perspective, we would be looking at the behavior and thinking about how can we adapt this behavior or this person's way of thinking into a socially acceptable framework. So what tools can we give this person in order to manage this kind of thinking pattern in a socially acceptable way?
It would be changing or attempting to change how they process it, not just the end result. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. So it's not just changing the behavior, but changing, and you can use various tools to do that. So you can use cognitive restructuring and stuff like that. I think it would all therapy, and it would be a therapeutic approach. Depends on the input of the person and their willingness to change. And I think this is why it's been so difficult to provide therapeutic input for people who are deemed to be psychopaths or have antisocial personality disorders, because they don't have a desire to change, because they're happy to keep doing what they're doing, and they don't see a reason why they should be caring about other people. No one can give them a good reason, because realistically speaking, there's no rational reason, right?
Yeah, and if they could see the reason, they probably wouldn't be psychopaths, would they?
Precisely.
Yeah, I was just about to mention one of the philosophical questions is, why should I be good? And that's sort of what they would ask. And what sort of rational reasons can you give them if they don't want to be good?
I mean, you could get into things like game theory, could you not? And give them logical.
You can. And you can bring up the idea of, like, you live in a society that provides you all these benefits and not in a state of nature.
But then they have to care about the society.
Yeah, that's it.
But with game theory, you're putting the kind of logical processes and mathematical results onto their benefits.
Yeah, but if they could just screw you over and get the same result.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
That woman in golden balls. I'll never forgive her.
Who? What now?
God, fucking golden balls is a deep cut.
She was a psychopath.
Golden balls specific episode.
Do you guys know golden balls?
No, yeah, Jasper Carrot.
Jasper Carrot. Yeah. So it's a competition show where they have balls, and you have to at the end of the show, there's like a game.
Or steal.
Yeah, split or steal. No, they just decide to split or steal, and if two people say split, then they split. If one person says steal, then they get the money. If they both say steal, then neither of them.
Okay.
And this woman was very convincing, and she was very attractive, and she convinced this guy who I felt so sorry for after, who obviously fancied her a bit, to split, and then stole it right under his nose, and he was in his face.
I used to watch it, and I always thought that I know exactly what I would do if I was in the final. I would look at them and say, I am going to choose steal, but I will split it with you. I'll shake on it now.
Yeah.
Because I am going to put steal. Either you trust me and we both potentially get something, or you don't trust me and we both get nothing.
Yeah.
You are going to end up getting nothing if you don't trust me. It seems the obvious answer, doesn't it? Yeah. I haven't heard of that game show for years.
It was pretty bad, to be fair, wasn't it? Let's be fair.
Yeah.
I've never even heard of it. I know Jasper Carrot, but
yeah. I mean, I recognise the name, but from a pinball game, so it's obviously not that you're talking about.
No, they had like 4 or 5 people, and they all got given like 5 different balls. They had different amounts of money in, or it would like knock off 10% of the total that had been put, and they had to lie and try and get themselves trusted and say how much money they had when the other people couldn't see it, and then they'd vote to see who stayed on, and then it went up to that split or steal game at the end. It was an interesting premise. Very weird presentation, though.
Yeah, and Jasper Carrot was a weird host as well. He wasn't. I feel like he's more of a comedian than a host.
Yeah.
He didn't make any jokes. That's the problem with it.
It's the thing with quiz shows in general. It's the host that makes it.
Well, it's just like this. Gordon Ramsay's just done a quiz show, hasn't he, as well?
Really?
Not seen it.
Watch it. I don't want to watch it.
It's like The Chase. I wouldn't care much about if it wasn't for Bradley Walsh, because he's fucking superb.
Yeah.
I don't know any of these things. You must watch terrestrial TV or something.
Used to. I actually, quite worryingly, I now
Don't help me.
watch clips from The Chase on YouTube.
Brilliant.
You outed me. I can't believe that.
I decided not to watch terrestrial TV. It must be about 20 years ago now. Stopped watching it. Then the birth of streaming came out, and it was just like brilliant. I think, streaming, they had it right at the start. They had like a couple of services, and between the two services you could watch everything. But now they've gone the wrong way, and now you have to be signed up to about 5 different services to be able to capture everything again now. And it's like,
Yeah, I've decided to do, I think, 3.
really?
Yeah,
Uh,
I've got 3, and one is a
Disney,
shared
Amazon, and Netflix.
Same here. And we
We
got
should pool
Amazon mostly for the
resources.
fast delivery.
Yeah, that's it. The
That's
delivery.
why I had Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. I've also got Shudder, the horror
that-
movie streaming
Is
service.
that added to Amazon, or is that separate?
No, I get it through the website itself
Oh,
because
okay.
it's cheaper.
Oh,
That's good. Actually, we do have one of the Amazon editions. We've got Stars, because they do some DC stuff every now and then.
Fair.
Yeah,
But
big Doom
oddly, I
Patrol
keep
on
getting
there.
signed up to Stars Play, and I'm like, I haven't clicked it. And they actually, the other day, Ivy, Katie, and me were all in the kitchen, and I suddenly got a notification on my phone saying, "You've just activated a week's on Stars Play." And I was like, we definitely haven't. We most definitely haven't. We are all in the kitchen. Like, before you could think, oh, maybe, Ivy's been playing around with the remote or something like that. But I know 100% that no one has been. The TV isn't even on.
maybe it's Jeff.
Sorry?
Maybe it was Jeff.
Yes, maybe.
I have your account details, and I do it just to mess with you.
I wouldn't put it past you. Nice to have you here, 3 Vikings. We'll catch you soon. So as we were saying, from the psychopathic perspective, they wouldn't necessarily, in general, I guess, view morality in the way anyone else would.
I think, and Chris, if you have a different kind of view on this, that would be really interesting. But I think their view on it would be very kind of utilitarian.
Agreed.
It would be about kind of, it would be about what's best, and it would be utilitarian compared to them. They'd be the center of that. So
almost more hedonistic then. But even then,
not
a
necessarily.
quite localized hedonist.
So I raised it to you before, Joe, which you might be interested in this, because I attended a couple of talks before all of Corona and everything on serial killers, and it was done by the woman who is informing the government on how to act with things like serial killers and psychopathy. And she was talking about the morality aspect and how one of the things that they use in questioning is, say you worked with somebody that you didn't like, and one day you decided to poison their sandwich. So you took their sandwich out of the office fridge, you put poison in it, you put it back in the fridge, and then they didn't eat it. Would that be immoral? It's like, well, no, because nothing bad happened.
From a consequentialist perspective, that would be definitely correct. There's arguments made from the fact that you've done something that is potentially going to cause harm, though, which...
with intent.
Yes. So...
But, yeah, that was one of the things she raised in the talk, which I found quite interesting.
So did you say a psychopath would say, no, nothing was wrong because nothing happened?
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought that essentially, even if they had killed them, they'd have said nothing was wrong. And they'd be more likely to say something was wrong because their plan went to shit.
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing I have an issue with Dostoevsky or Dostoevsky, whatever the Jordan Peterson.
Brothers Karnov.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, where he's talking about how there's this woman that I haven't read it, so I don't know the exact story, but this is how Jordan Peterson describes it. There's this woman in a block of flats that this guy doesn't like very much, always causing problems and stuff, and so he decides to kill her and plans it and stuff. And that's a very kind of like psychopathic perspective on how somebody would make that decision, rather than kind of going through a different process of like kind of, is there a different route around? It's very direct. And then Jordan Peterson's like, this is how atheists would be, and it's like, no, it isn't, because otherwise we'd have way more psychopaths.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're demonstrably wrong, and he's a clinical psychologist. Apparently, it really annoys me because he's a rubbish clinical psychologist.
He's a sellout these days.
That reminds me of one of the points that Penn Jillette makes that I actually agree with, which are fewer and fewer as time goes by. When he says that theists will say to him, well, if you're an atheist, why don't you just go around killing and raping as much as you want? And he says, I do. It just so happens that how much I want to do that is 0.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it should be for everyone.
I think Ricky Gervais stole that one from him as well, though, didn't he?
Quite possibly.
I've been pretty much all of his material stolen, so.
He'll watch this one day and he'll be seething.
Dear. Yeah. I tell you what, though, the one good thing I can say about Ricky Gervais is his TV series Afterlife.
I liked the first season, and then the second season was just the first season again.
I haven't watched the second season yet. So,
don't bother, it's just the first season again.
Fair enough.
The last time Ricky Gervais made me laugh was back in the 90s when he was on the Sunday show or something. And he said one joke like, I was going to give money to cancer research, but they didn't have any going on in the shop, so I walked away. That was about the funniest thing I've ever heard him say.
I quite liked his first couple of stand-up shows when they came out. But I don't think I'd enjoy rewatching them now.
No, there'll be so much that you'll cringe at now.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed watching him in Grand Theft Auto.
Yes.
That was a really weird thing. I was like, why is he here?
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was odd.
His sense. I don't like cringe comedy at the best of times. So he doesn't appeal to me in that regard. And his take on philosophy and things like that is a bit of a joke as well. So there's nothing he does that really appeals to me. And when he's cited as an authority, it just makes me look at the person who cites him and I go, really? Really?
He's a comedian,
Gervais
isn't he?
is the best you've got?
Yeah. This is the thing. I think that in terms of accessible atheist influences, it's lacking in the mainstream a lot.
Lacking.
What was it? There was who said? I think it was that Ethan guy. He put a tweet out saying, "What do you think the atheist community is lacking?" And my response was a belief in God. I put an actual answer afterwards, but I just couldn't resist that. I was like,
yeah. Well played. Did you get a lot of hate from other atheists?
No, people loved it.
Oh, brilliant. Usually you put a comment like that and everyone takes you seriously and just comes up with memes about prove your God, prove your God, prove your God. It's quite an heuristic online community. I must say, it's very, 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 very weird. I almost want to see these people in their own environment and see if they're actually like this in real life or if it's just how they are online. And I think I'll be charitable and I'll say most of them probably aren't as awful as they are online.
Hey, this is one thing. You've met me several times. You know I'm exactly the same in real life as I am online. And that's not a good thing.
You're a lovable cunt.
I was once I went to a party with an old friend, and I was really upset with how they managed to completely sum me up in so few words. And they just introduced me to someone. They said, "Hi, this is Chris. He's the politest arsehole you'll ever meet." Fuck you. Yes, but fuck you.
So, if we're thinking about from a psychopath's perspective, they're probably not going to be really thinking about morality much, but externally we would be judging their behaviors through whatever moral lens that we look at. But I think you raised a good point, Dave, actually, with should we even judge them in that way? Because if someone was actually, say, insane, right? Let's go with a completely different disorder. We would look at their behaviors in a very different way, wouldn't we? We would, if they were unable to do anything and they were just flailing arms and they ended up causing loads of damage, you wouldn't think that they were acting immorally. You were thinking they had something with their brain that was making them act that way and they needed help. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Did you hear about the cop in America slamming the woman with dementia to the ground yesterday or the day before?
No, I didn't.
No, I didn't hear that.
Okay. There was a woman with dementia, and she went into like a Best Buy and she picked up some flowers and walked out. She literally just forgot she had them in her hand and went on like a little wander. So they stopped her and kind of returned her to the Best Buy or Walmart or whatever it was. And the cops came, and she was, of course, she was flustered and panicked and freaking out. So she wasn't being very responsive. So the cop yanked her arm, put it behind her back, and dislocated her shoulder.
Oof.
She started screaming in pain. So the cop picked her up and slammed her to the ground.
Fuck.
Because because she was stealing and therefore behaving wrong, and she'd broken the law. But if you look at that in a moral sense, she didn't even know she was doing it.
Mm.
I wouldn't consider having broken the law either, because there was no intent to steal. It was just, oh, I like the look of these. Oh, look at that over there. Oh, go wandering over there now.
Yeah.
And the woman didn't know her name, anything like that. And she's registered as having dementia. And she was from a home nearby. So I see it in that sort of sense, like you say. If they don't know what they're doing, then they can't be held accountable for what they do.
Yeah.
The only people in that situation to be held accountable is the cop, and potentially the home that she's from in letting her out unsupervised.
Unsupervised.
Yeah, that's fair too.
So
did she escape,
Sorry.
or did they just let her out?
Oh, yeah.
I think she just wandered out.
Right.
So sort of negligence.
So I guess there's the it's probably good to draw a distinction between, I guess, if we're talking about like broader morality and whether somebody has a moral perspective or something like that. That's different to asking if they have the capability to understand if something is wrong or right. And I would argue that psychopaths do understand what is wrong and right, and caring about that. Yeah, they just don't care. But that doesn't mean that they don't have personal responsibility about those actions, because they do understand it's wrong.
That's
just because they don't care about what
it's wrong.
I want to raise a question about that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
They understand that society views it as wrong and right. Do they actually understand that it's wrong or right? Because that's different. They understand it's against the rules. They understand that the rules are labelled A is wrong, B is right. But that doesn't mean that they actually understand on this kind of moral level
No, so they don't.
That's just a list labeled A or B. It's not an understanding. It's not having true knowledge of wrong and right.
But they do understand the harmful consequences of their actions on others. So if I was to cause someone pain, I would have a point. I would have a frame of reference for what that pain would feel like because I feel pain as well. And uh, not caring about someone else's pain doesn't mean that they don't understand that somebody would feel that pain if they did that act.
So
Yeah,
if we
I
go
certainly
in,
agree with that kind of behaviour. But what
Yeah.
about with things that we'd describe as moral, which doesn't have that kind of first
So
order
a little
consequence?
bit more abstract.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think. Well, I think those things. Yeah, it's a little bit kind of more. Yeah, I mean, I certainly think the more intelligent psychopaths who would engage in that would probably understand it. You know, if I fired this person there, um, then they're not going to be able to feed their kids. But that's not really my problem.
yeah.
They understand the consequences, but it's about whether they care about those consequences or
so
not.
are most libertarians psychopaths? uh, that's a long running joke.
But yeah,
The thing is that to be a psychopath, you have to score above 25, and libertarians can't count that high. So,
Brilliant. We should probably apologize to any libertarians out there, but we're not going to.
yeah. If I was to apologise, it would be an example of glib superficial charm. So,
I'd see it as a message that we had to send somebody to rescue you.
uh... yeah, the pandemic definitely brought out some of the more negative behaviors of libertarians as well. Like
Just people in general.
well, yeah, no, yeah, definitely people in general. But
Not us,
especially.
though. Not us. We're begging for it.
psychopaths are more likely to stay home because they're the ones who'd get sick.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So that they can reason that way. So that's exact the point I was going to ask you next, which you covered off, is essentially with at least a basic understanding of morality. Like a psychopath could actually understand these things. However, it depends on how they approach morality as well. If they were to listen to people that was to say it's wholly subjective, then surely they'd just go, well, then whatever I think is right, because that's basically what subjectivism is. So you'd need to try and somehow convince them of some normative ethical theory that applies to everyone and try and get them to adhere to that. I can't see how you could get a psychopath to fully engage with some form of objective morality in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's the struggle that therapists have had for, well, since we've been kind of like engaging with this, which to be fair hasn't been very long. As I said, the Cleckley stuff is only from the like early 20th century. So our understanding of psychopaths is still very young. It's heavily influenced by the media. And so far, most psychopaths are treatment resistant to the current treatments we have. So, but I'm optimistic because I, I have faith that as psychology progresses, our understanding of what the mechanisms behind psychopathy are, and we can address those in a more fundamental way. I think there's a lot of kind of new therapies that are coming out that are really handy, like CAT and ACT and stuff.
And it's also important for us to remember that there are different causes for it as well. So there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all treatment.
Well,
Because
this
look
is
at
the-
because
yeah.
there was that guy, wasn't there? I can't remember his name. I'm sure you'll know it. Who had the was it a railway spike go through his brain?
Oh, Phineas Gage.
Yes, that's the one. And he essentially got turned into a psychopath
Yeah, yeah, and
because a metal spike took out a part of his brain, and he could no longer process things like
emotional
empathy or
information.
compassion or whatever.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's a lot of information around the frontal lobe being a big factor in people's psychopathy. If the frontal lobe is different or deviant in some way, that's not value judgment. It's just a descriptive word. Some people see deviant as a value judgment. In psychology, it's not. It just means different from the norm. So yeah, like there's things going on, but I think we need to understand what psychopathy is properly. I think that's still ongoing. Not Rob, Bob Hare is still definitely saying that our understanding is not at its end stage yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of research going on still.
Yeah,
Basically.
and so long as the brain structures are there, I mean, the brain, although it's not a muscle, it kind of works like one. The bits that you use more often get better and faster pathways and work more and more subconsciously as opposed to consciously. So even if you're using something like cognitive empathy instead of emotional empathy, eventually that becomes subconscious and essentially emulates normal empathy.
Virtue ethics, essentially.
I was
Yeah.
just going to say that sounds akin to the training you'd go through with virtue ethics.
I mean, I would say that largely I process things more from a cognitive empathy than an emotional empathy
And
because I
yeah.
need to make sense of stuff, not feel stuff. If it doesn't make sense to me, then I'm lost. It's just
Yeah, and
what
even
I do.
that making sense could be, oh, if I say or do this thing, it could harm someone else.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't really want to harm someone else, and therefore, and the work I do with some of the people that I support is very much along those lines because they don't understand other people have different minds to them. So trying to
Yeah.
be like, well, how would it feel for you? Put that, them do that for other people. It's like, yeah, it's that training. Absolutely, definitely.
I think a lot of people don't really understand cognitive empathy.
No.
The analogy I used to describe someone before was like, if you were stood next to your oven, emotional empathy would be knowing it's hot because it feels hot. Cognitive empathy would be knowing it's hot because the dial's turned up to 7 and the hob on the top is glowing. And I know
like
that means
analogy.
heat.
That's good. I like that. That's a very good analogy, actually.
Oh,
For that.
winner, winner.
Yeah.
You should put it in a paper, get it published, and be like, yeah, it was all me.
I'll steal it. Yeah. We're going to steal it.
Go for it.
Of course, we've got video evidence, so when she
Damn.
sues you...
I'm going to...
If you ever got cause to use it, go for it.
I have actually heard that one before.
Fuck off.
Just kidding.
So, does anyone out there have any questions or anything like that they'd like to ask about psychopaths or psychopathy in itself? If you do, let us know. We'll answer them quite soon. Three Rusty Nails has a statement. I don't know if it turns into a question. It's long. I'm going to just read it out. Saying Sartre had a problem with psychologists because they don't investigate far enough into psychosis. And Sartre believes, as I do, that emotions or dispositions are a choice and have an original choice. The reason why I asked if it had morals involved, because it shows a good example how to relax, comfortable, and be normal. Dave's actually responded saying morality is more about judging interactions between moral agents. So the ability to relax, be comfortable, and be normal isn't really to do with morality. Identity and the self would be closer. So he's already answered the question, but I figured I'd read it out.
I kind of disagree with the whole thing there of saying that emotions are a choice.
Yeah.
Because we know that emotions come from a subconscious part of the brain that acts before any kind of choice making. You have
I
a
think
choice how to react to an emotion,
Yeah, you
but
can
the
also
emotional
mull something
response
over.
itself.
You can mull
Yeah.
something over and inflate the emotion. Like
Yes.
we were talking earlier about someone feeling a little bit anxious and then thinking about, oh, I've got an anxiety disorder, and building up that anxiousness. So you can choose to make something feel worse, but I think you're exactly right in what you say. You choose how you react to the emotion. Most emotions they hit you out of nowhere rather than you going, I'm going to choose to feel like this today. I mean, shit, if I could choose how I felt, I'd feel fucking happy every single day, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would argue that psychosis is not really to do with emotions per se, because it's more about, well, there's lots of different theories on what causes psychosis. You know, there's neurological aspects, there's trauma aspects, there's
At its basis, isn't psychosis just some form of removal from reality?
psychosis is literally that. Yeah, exactly. Where you either have a belief or an experience that other people aren't experiencing. So
That doesn't
hallucination.
necessitate anything about emotion, does it?
No, not necessarily. So I think, and I wouldn't say that people have an original choice that leads to that situation. It can be very much a underlying factor that leads to it that people aren't aware of and definitely don't choose.
Yeah, I mean, you can have hallucinations by choosing to take mushrooms or by just being schizophrenic, for
Yeah,
example. And there is no
exactly.
choice made there.
I think we had this discussion a little bit in the last time I was on now about, I think Three Rusty Nails doesn't believe that there is a subconscious. So I think that's probably where he's coming from, in the sense that he believes it's a choice that we make at some point, but there's no subconscious aspect to it.
Confuses me a lot.
Yeah,
It's a hard one to comprehend. Actually, not having a subconscious or an unconscious, or however you want to define it, I find that one quite a difficult one to comprehend myself. But I haven't read anything from Sartre, so I don't know what his thoughts or justifications on that are. But surely, you know, I mean, going down the path of MRIs and things like that again. Sorry, I know they're not particularly reliable, but they show that there are
Yeah.
these unconscious thoughts going on. They might not tell us much information about what they are, but there's thoughts that you're not actually having yourself until you have them yourself.
Well,
I suppose part of it might depend on what kind of thing we actually classify as a thought. Because I'm sure even Rusty Nails or Sartre wouldn't disagree with the fact that we subconsciously breathe.
well, this I guess this
You
is what I was
don't.
about to say as well. Is that some behavior isn't even generated in the brain, and I think I said this in the last thing about how the spinal cord doesn't get enough recognition.
You did.
But the spinal cord is, like, so for instance, if we put our hand on a hot stove, the signal from the brain to the hand would be too long, and would end up burning ourselves more. So we have a signal from the spinal cord that's a more direct nerve to the hand in order to remove our hand. So that behavior, because removing your hand is a behavior, is directed from the spinal cord, and we have other things that do that, such as like running. Say you step out in the front of a car, and you see it, and you start to run or something. You try and avoid it. That's the spinal cord based response,
Hmm.
because it's a reaction that needs as quicker thing as possible. So it takes the shortest route it possibly can.
I mean, is that like subconscious?
That is the subconscious. That is the
Yeah.
subconscious. But it just shows that, like, the fact that it's not coming out of the brain, where
Yeah.
we have essentially measured all of our conscious thoughts. It comes from a different part of the body, where it's like, in order to make it quick, that behavior as fast as possible, then it shows that
Aren't there neurons in the stomach as well?
That's what I was
there's
about
so
to
many
raise.
neurons in the stomach. So
Yeah.
many, and that's where our biggest store of serotonin is as well, which I learned that recently. Found that quite
Yeah.
interesting. So we have more serotonin in the stomach than we do in our brains.
I don't think
And
I
that's a
have
happy
any.
one. I say hormone, neurotransmitter.
Mine is store bought. It's fine.
Free Rusty says, "No, I don't believe in the subconscious. That's a concept from Sartre. Consciousness is consciousness. Consciousness is conscious of sunbathing. Oh, something. You corrected yourself."
I think I prefer the sunbathing.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Rusty? About how there are autonomic responses. So you touch something hot and you instantly move away. You're not consciously processing that information. It's happening before it consciously does it. You might then have a conscious thought of, "Ow, that really hurt," afterwards, but you've got that thought underneath first. I'll give you
Three rusty nails is a pea zombie. That's why he doesn't believe in any of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if there
I
is no
do think it
subconscious,
was-
does that make us all pea zombies? If there is actually no subconscious?
No, because we have awareness of our experience.
Sartre was writing his stuff in the 40s and 50s mostly, right?
Yeah.
So I would personally argue that it's somewhat irrational to take his position on what counts as conscious and subconscious before things like MRIs and a lot of neurology even existed.
That's
We
a
can
fair
show
point.
where this stuff happens. We can demonstrate it in real time how it works with stuff that didn't exist when Sartre was making his writing.
It's like we were
Well-
discussing the other day, Dave, wasn't it? You were talking about how there are certain aspects of science that should influence philosophy and even metaphysics, and vice versa, that sort of it's a symbiotic relationship between the two. And maybe if you're at a time where you're like, well, there's no evidence of a subconscious, it makes sense to make an argument that, there isn't one. But now we've got evidence of a subconscious. So does it still make sense to hold that belief?
And I think that's exactly how I feel about things. Is science and psychology and stuff like that need to work in tandem with philosophy in order to kind of reach like these kind of bigger questions, rather than it being kind of like solipsism, for instance, where it's like, oh well, how do you even know that any of this really exists? Well, that's not really helpful, because I believe it exists. I'm in this world, so it proves that there's other things that obviously I'm experiencing and stuff. So regardless of that, what's a philosophy that's actually kind of useful in this situation?
That's the
how I
thing,
feel
isn't
about
it? With solipsism, if it doesn't matter if it's true,
No.
the experience is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. If we're a brain in a vat, and I know your comment of we are brains in vats. Technically, it's
Bone bats.
yeah, with bone vats. But at the end of the day, it's dealing with our reality. So realistically speaking, it doesn't actually make a difference if we are in the Matrix or anything like that. We've got to answer questions about the reality that we are experiencing as a species, as an individual, etc. So fine, maybe we are brains in vats, and maybe there are different answers, but the answers of our reality are what we need to focus on, because we can't answer that one. So let's answer this one.
Yeah, you saying Matrix, I was going to bring up simulation theory. Because, I mean, yeah, mathematically, we probably are in a simulation, but it still doesn't fucking matter. Because our reality is what we still experience. Unless you can give me some fucking cheat codes, I don't care if I'm a simulation.
About a roll of
My
phone,
dear-
that's the cheat code.
When I was like 18 or whatever, my dearest friend Harry, the guy in that video, he managed to convince me. He was like, "Oh yeah," he went along all these lines and went, "We're in a simulation," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. All of this stuff makes sense." And then he was like, "So if the simulation is real, there has to be someone who made the simulation, and that's God." And I was like, what? They were trying to prove to me that I had different standards, but then I was like, I don't actually believe the simulation theory either. So
I mean, like I say, mathematically, we probably are in a simulation.
Yes,
That's
and
how
also,
the math works. But
on the front of
so
the
what?
God, it's the programmer. The programmer would be the god of the simulation, but wouldn't actually be God in the deity sense of things anyway. Not necessarily. It would be a programmer. I've made programs, I'm not a god to the things that I've programmed, It might seem to them, if they had enough consciousness, that I would be, but I wouldn't actually be a god in the way that we understand gods.
I've played The Sims, and I'm a vengeful god. Shit.
And I'm a pervy god. I just made the sisters make out content. That's all I ever did in Sims.
wow.
I'm going. Just
I feel like
quickly,
I've learned a lot more about you in that one sentence.
well, it's still on my mind. If Three Rusty Nails wants to look into conscious and subconscious and the way our brains work, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a really good book for learning about type 1 and type 2 thinking.
That's one that you've brought up a few times before. I think that's on my reading list still. I don't know if it's one I've bought and is in the pile or not.
Yeah, I had to read that for both my first year psychology and first year philosophy.
Oh, interesting. Have you read that one?
No, I want to though.
Yeah,
it's good. It's a great read. I read it in about a night because it's just that interesting.
Oh, really?
All of my lecturers were like, buy our book.
Yeah,
really.
So I only read books by the lecturers I had, basically.
No, mine were pretty good. They did, include their books in the syllabus, but they were pretty good about recommending all the good books.
To be fair, you are like Johnny Five when you read, though, as well, Dave. You sort of like, you get a book and you're like, and I'm there, page 1, having reread the first sentence 17 times because it's just not going in.
I'm with you, Joe.
Have you ever done what I took to doing a few years ago, which is actually unreading a book? Where at bedtime you read a book and you're like 7 chapters in, and you're like, I don't remember what I read in the last chapter. I'll start back at chapter 6, and then you read like 20 pages before your head just goes and you doze off. And then you try again the next night, it's like, shit, I don't remember the last 50 pages. So 50 pages back, like I read another 20 pages and fall asleep. It's like, shit, that's another 50 pages back tomorrow. I started on page 180 and now I'm on 6.
I've done that with a TV series.
Oh, I can watch TV series all the time. I had to unread most of my stuff today writing my assignment. Just had complete brain fart doing everything and had to go back and reread all the chapters related to it. So yeah.
No, it's not just me.
I know that feeling.
Russie says, what were they? Context, please. I've forgotten what we were just talking about. Do any of you know what that was in relation to?
The sisters on Sims?
No.
Yes. They were fun.
I'm resigning from AiR now. Bye.
Wow. What have I done?
Welcome to Joe Hub.
No, I don't want to be on Joe
Hub. Leon says, I really hate it when I'm reading and it's just not going through my brain. Yeah, I have that one happen quite often. There are times when I read.
Have you tried audiobooks? Oh, well, Joe, I know that probably won't help you as much.
No.
You need to read it and listen to it. So you need to listen to an audiobook and read simultaneously.
Yeah.
That'll be the best.
It's actually what I have to do with when I'm watching a TV series or something like that. Because I'm dyslexic and I also have what I'll coin ear dyslexia for the sake of the conversation. I need to watch the show, but I need to read the words underneath it at the same time as listening to it, in the hope that it actually goes in. It's weird though. I mean, sometimes it's a lot easier than others. And I don't know. Obviously, things like energy levels affect that.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes it's a lot easier, and I can read really well, or watch something and I not have to have the subtitles on. Other times it's just like I'm trying really hard, but nothing is going in.
I think fatigue is a big factor in reading. Yeah. It's not a lot of people. It's not like watching a film or something like that. It's not passive at all. It's really hard to read passively. So it's an active thing. So that's why it gets tiring. So I have to be awake, really quite awake to be able to read effectively.
Yeah, to do my speed reading, I do. If I'm tired, it's just like.
I hate it when I've read like 3 pages and then I'm like, I have no idea. My eyes were just following the words, and that's it. It's just a process of.
You need to keep yourself awake by reading in the bath. Then you're mentally turned on because you're worried about dropping the book.
Or drowning if I fall asleep while reading it.
How
I used to fall
deep do you
asleep in
sleep?
the shower. I used to fall asleep in the shower standing up. Back in the day, desperately trying to get ready for work, and then all of a sudden I go, oh, did I get in the shower? I must have got in the shower. Yeah, no, I remember getting out of bed now. Rusty, yeah, the book was Thinking Fast and Slow. Was that Daniel Kahneman, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Israeli American psychologist.
Fair. Well, there you go. Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that's one that we should all read. Except for Dave, who's already read it. But I think it'd be good. Be good for all of us to read. Maybe that can be one that we can discuss. What have you clicked on? What have you just clicked on? Oh, did you just catch the bit about the sisters kissing?
I'm guessing so. And I'm sorry about this, but I'm gonna have to go. I've just
That's
realized.
cool. I think we're pretty much done. But yeah, no worries, Dave. If you've got to shoot off, we'll close up soon anyway. But thank you for dropping in.
No worries. Sorry I was late. Yeah, sorry I was late, everyone. Good night, and I'll catch you all later. All right, good night.
Bye. Yeah. I know we've gone quite off-piste, haven't we, really? But I think that we've basically covered off the difference when thinking about morality from a psychological perspective to a philosophical one. So when we're talking about morality, it's more of a descriptive take when you're thinking about it from a psychological perspective, and it's more on an individual basis. We also discussed psychopaths and how they could actually interact with morality and common misconceptions about psychopaths, and loads of information about them as well. I mean, to be honest, I think there's so much that I can't really effectively summarize it. Does anyone have any questions before we go? And do either of you have anything else you'd like to say on either of the topics tonight?
I was basically just following along and interjecting, so not really.
I've had fun. I don't often get to speak about psychopaths in such depth, so especially not what they actually are. Like sometimes, it's really nice to have a conversation about like the reality of psychopathy, because so often you'll be like wanting to talk about psychopathy, which doesn't happen that often, but you'll be like want to talk about psychopathy, and everyone will be like, "Oh yeah, like serial killers and stuff," and it's like, no, no, please, just have a
CEOs and surgeons.
Yeah, CEOs and
It's
surgeons.
a properly interesting topic, though, and it's like you say, so misunderstood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had a great time.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I've really enjoyed the conversation as well. Oh, okay. Random interjection from Overanator saying Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts. Is that psychopathy? I don't know who that is.
No,
Is the cop?
no, it's not psychopathy. It's racism.
Yes.
There you go. Psychopaths are not necessarily racist. Racists are not necessarily psychopaths. They could be, but there's not an intrinsic link there.
No, and I don't think Derek is Derek. I'm on first name basis with Derek. I don't think Derek is a psychopath. No, he was just a racist.
Maximum Derek.
I'm glad he's
Racist with
guilty on all
delusions of
counts.
grandeur as well.
Thanks for that news. I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what would a psychopath say about that result?
That would depend on the psychopath.
It does definitely depend on the psychopath.
There you go. You can't generalize. But I thought, psychology was all about generalizing. But,
Psychopaths would probably say, I don't really give a shit.
That's a fair assumption.
Mm.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody who has watched and joined in the chat. Special thank you to both of you for being here tonight. It's been great to have you. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a little bit. It's interesting to see how similar and different morality is from a psychological perspective to a philosophical one as well. They definitely cross over, and I think they could definitely do with spending a lot of time, actually communicating with each other and fusing their ideas together, especially from an evolutionary psychology perspective and to modern psychology as well. But yeah, thank you both very much. You've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show on morality and psychopathy from a psychological perspective. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
Maximum Derek.
Good night, y'all.